Dungeon Hunter. Chapters 41 to 60. Chapter 41 to 42. Group Training. Exactly 1 week after the audition, the day after the results were announced, I ordered Devil Hunters to convene. There is a wide assortment in the group. I looked at Krasla and the 6 people gathered in front of the guild house early in the morning and nodded. 4 of them were new. They were new hires who passed the recruitment. There was a reason I gathered them so quickly after the successful candidates were announced. It was possible due to the work I did in advance. All 4 of the awakened were on the verge of failing until I gave them high scores. It was natural for them to follow me into Devil Hunters. Although it was only temporary, this wasn't a bad thing for them either. Captain Nim, Yu-Un Hai and Li Ji Hai. No, what should I call you? One of the 4 temporary members said. He was Kim Chun-won, a bard with a title regarding cursing. Now he was in his mid-20s but his mouth couldn't stop cursing. Come, but I didn't answer and shook my head. Along with Yu-Un Hai and Li Ji Hai, I had the required tournament criteria of 8 people. I would win the championship with an assortment of people. Furthermore, the tournament had a significant scale according to Kim Yong-woo. It was the introduction of the first ever rankings and each awakened had a chance to earn some merits. If so, I needed to be on top. It would be easier to obtain good awakened if I was known as the strongest in South Korea. Victory was quite important but I couldn't reveal everything. There needed to be an emphasis on human capabilities. I needed to obtain the title of the strongest but I couldn't move in a manner impossible for humans. Captain Nim. As expected, it took less than 3 minutes for 2 women to talk to him. Yu-Un Hai and Li Ji Hai. At the same time, the 4 new members swallowed their saliva. Yu-Un Hai had a youthful cuteness while Li Ji Hai was an intellectual beauty. It was no wonder why the men gazed at the rare beauties. Yu-Un Hai ran over and lightly hugged me with tears in her eyes. Jorik, I could feel electric currents. Yu-Un Hai's passive was triggered. Now it didn't even tickle me. I had the Lightning God technique. Although Lightning God was sleeping, the power was still dwelling inside my body. Yu-Un Hai's passive output wasn't higher than the power in my blood. I knew you were alive. Yu-Un Hai wiped her eyes on my suit. I had gone back and forth to the dungeon with Yu-Un Hai many times. Maybe it was because I wasn't affected by her passive but she carelessly revealed her emotions. Welcome back. Li Ji Hai also made a welcome expression. It seemed like she hadn't slept as her makeup hid dark circles. How have you been doing? Well, first let's move to a different place. The 8 people needed to gather power. I forcibly removed Yu-Un Hai and led them to a pre-reserved cafe. A luxurious cafe located on the 2nd floor of a building. There was a large table in the center where 8 people were sitting. On the table were cups of coffee or drinks and homemade cakes. He had reserved it for the whole day, so including the owner of the cafe, there were only 9 people present. Except for the owner, the other people were the members of Devil Hunters. Yeah, as expected of Captain Nim. You are really different. Kim Chun-won quivered and made a fuss. In contrast, Yu-Un Hai, Li Ji Hai and Krasla's reactions were calm. It was only renting the cafe. After the turmoil subsided, I said coldly, I think there will be many questions. But first, you guys have joined due to the ranking competition. And of course, I don't expect a lot from you. Yu-Un Hai had been trained by entering the dungeon but this time there were 4 new members. They were tools to fill the insufficient numbers. What could I expect from those that would be used once and then thrown away? Of course, their potential was higher than average or they had special skills or titles. If the Devil Hunters were needed for an emergency raid then they would join. They could also fill in the numbers for regular raids. After watching for a bit, I would decide based on the result whether to temporarily include them or not. Even after the competition was over, there would be a variety of people I could use for temporary work. The excellent ones could be formally adopted as members but I honestly had no great expectations. One of the new hires frowned like he was chewing shit. Captain Nim, aren't your words too severe? You will regret it. We each have our own rhythm as awakened. Complaints poured out from the new hires. Yu-Un Hai and Li Ji Hai knew my skills to some extent so they kept their mouths shut. You would have already been dropped if it wasn't for me. The new hires stared dumbly. I talked with a cold smile. However, you can't just participate using the name of Devil Hunters. You should have basic skills. Starting from tomorrow, I will train you for 3 weeks. This is a confirmed issue and can't be avoided. The inside of the cafe was quiet. It won't be that. I sipped an Americano while enjoying the aroma. They had decided to participate, but there was no hurry. It was enough if only Krasla and I participated. Both of our skills would be acknowledged, but the entire group devil hunters needed to be recognized. It was necessary to make sure the rest of the members were moderately trained. I put down my cup. Then Li Ji-hai, who had been looking at me, asked, "Captain Nim, can you roughly describe the ranking competition?" It wasn't a big deal if I told them, so I opened up. The ranking competition itself is simple. 8 people in a raid group are gathered to fight the opponent. Depending on the results, we will be given a ranking. But this ranking competition isn't just limited to Heaven's Will. Famous guilds will be participated, so this will have an influence on the future rating of the Awakened in South Korea. Gulp. The expressions of the new recruits changed. It was the first time they heard about the ranking competition involving other famous guilds. We will unconditionally win. Li Ji-hai determined the contents of my words and said with a sigh. By the way, who is the person next to Captain Nim? Yoon-hai, who had been watching quietly, asked about Krasla. They wondered about the man with black skin. Krasla will train you. His primary weapon is a spear, but he can use other battle techniques. It is good to meet you. I am Krasla. Krasla spoke for the first time. The eyes of the members widened. It was surprising to hear Korean spoken in that voice. Dark elves often had a beautiful voice, and Krasla did as well. Wow, you have an amazing voice. Yoon-hai spoke her honest opinion. Are you sure of his skills? He seems to be lacking spirit. But voice didn't have anything to do with capabilities. Kim Chun-won shrugged. Krasla seemed quite thin. This was also the nature of the dark elves. Even if they exercised, they wouldn't gain muscles. Krasla didn't budge. He continued sitting silently like a stone statue. I just laughed. You will see tomorrow. He wouldn't be able to say such words after a day. 1 million copies of Kim Chun-won couldn't even compare to one Krasla. I had time to relax after that statement. The atmosphere quickly became harmonious with occasional laughter. But my ears could already hear their screams. A pension in Ganwang-do, Chuncheon. Behind the Blue Mountains and rippling river existed a well-appointed open-air training ground for devil hunters. Everyone cried out, "Wow!" from the clean air and vast nature as they slept overnight. But that good time passed quickly. The moment they changed into comfortable clothes, their hell began. Krasla greeted the new members while holding a red spear. He said with no expression, "Bring out your weapons." What did you say? Kim Chun-won was a bard, but he had a dagger at his waist, and the other members also brought out their weapons. First I will see your skills. And any person that manages to hurt me will be excluded from training in the future. You, what a ridiculous guy. Kim Chun-won licked his dagger with his tongue. He was feigning an evil impression. The action was meant to intimidate. Of course, Krasla was still expressionless. Don't get excited. As Captain Nim pointed out, your capabilities are insignificant. First of all, I'll check the magic. Li Ji-hai calmly analyzed the situation. Then all of a sudden, Kim Chun-won took off his jacket and rushed forward with madness in his eyes. You cocky bastard, I will kill you, you fucker. He sliced all around the upper body. Kim Chun-won used the momentum. His first performance of licking the dagger seemed to have failed. But he couldn't see the body anymore. He hadn't expected it after rushing with the dagger. However, he didn't know about Krasla's strength. PPAK. Kayok. Kim Chun-won spun 360 degrees and fell to the floor. Krasla had struck him hard in the legs. Don't get excited. Li Ji-hai sighed. Krasla moved fiercely like a hurricane. Get ready everyone. Water sphere. Chawahik. Her occupation was a water magician. Water flew from Li Ji-hai's staff and smashed into Krasla. The remaining 3 members attacked with their weapons, but it was already one step too late. PPAK. 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 The sound of popping occurred 3 times until only Krasla and Li Ji-hai were standing. It happened in the blink of an eye. An overwhelmingly ridiculous situation. Li Ji-hai had a bemused expression before she laughed and laid down her staff. I surrender. At the same time, there was one person missing. She is needed. Where has she gone? The captain had gone somewhere separately with Yoon-hai. At this moment, Li Ji-hai felt envious. Then Krasla looked at Li Ji-hai and clicked his tongue. You can't do that. At the same time, I was at the foot of a valley with Yu Un-hai. The water is clear. Captain Nim, take a look at this. Yu Un-hai enthusiastically watched the water bubbling in the water. She would receive training with the members, but something needed to be done first. Right now she couldn't control the passive skill, electric current, N. I wondered if it was possible with the lightning god technique. Additionally, the valley was very rich in lightning attribute. Usually more than 3 sides of the valley were blocked, so there were many cases of the energy emitted from a lightning storm being trapped. There was a high probability that I could find the answer here. The residual lightning energy in the valley would have a synergy effect. Yu Un-hai, we didn't come here to play. Heek, I understand, but why did you only take me? Yu Un-hai smiled and playfully asked. There were multiple occasions of hunting in the dungeon, but there was no sign of that this time. I spoke like it wasn't a big deal. From now on, you will see your passive skill, electric current. I have a passive skill? Yu Un-hai asked with confusion. There was nothing to hide, so I spoke the truth. Recently I mastered a lightning skill. I should be able to match the wavelength of that skill with electric current. If it works, then the trigger of your passive will disappear. Really? So now you are a lightning skill user. Ah, it is like that. What are you going to do, Captain Nim? Will you hold my wrist like in martial arts novels? No. Then there would be no need for you to take me to a place like this. Yu Un-hai spat out words quickly. I stared at Yu Un-hai's face. First of all, take it off. Oh, so I need to take it off. Take off. Yu Un-hai suddenly retreated with surprise. She hid her breasts with both hands and glared at me. I'm disappointed. You've been so bad, Captain Nim. I don't know what you are talking about. I'm not interested in your body. In fact, it was as I said. Yu Un-hai was a beautiful human, but she was incomparable to Chrisley. It was the same for her body as well. Chrisley had a superior body. Of course, the standards of beauty was different. She had her own charm, but I didn't feel the need to touch her. Let alone the difference in color. If I wanted something, then I could get it anywhere. Yu Un-hai made a perplexed expression. Then why do you want me to take it off? I need to take a close look at how electric current flows outside your body. That way I can distinguish the wavelength. Outside and inside, both sides are needed. Is that why we entered the valley? This area is rich in lightning magic power. It is a place where electric current can be maximized. Will you take it off now? I understand, but do I have to take off my underwear? Underwear can stay. I only need to look at the flow of electric current. There was no need to see the whole thing. Exposing 2/3 of her body would be enough to examine the wavelength direction. Yu Un-hai asked doubtfully. She put down the hands covering her breasts. Aish, you really surprised me when you told me to take it off. You don't have to worry that I will feel lust towards your body. Hail, then isn't Captain Nim blind? That answer is a joke. It isn't a joke, Yu Un-hai mumbled. It felt like a toothpick had been mercilessly stabbed into my lungs. But she didn't do anything. A team member couldn't question the captain of the raid group. Yu Un-hai glanced at me a few more times before closing her eyes. And she slowly raised her sweatshirt from the bottom. Soon her smooth skin was revealed. I could glimpse her ribs and Barbie-like breasts. She was wearing white underwear and Yu Un-hai proudly placed her hands on her hips. Hum, are you enjoying the sight? It is a pity about your breasts. I'm very sorry. Sorry that my breasts are small. I am still growing. Soon you will be begging to see it. Yu Un-hai sat down and pretended to cry. I pushed Yu Un-hai. Plop. Foo. What are you doing? Yu Un-hai, who fell into the water, strongly protested, but I didn't pay attention. Shut up. I will examine your body. Huh? Huck. Quajijijik. A strong current was flowing through the valley. The electric current flowing in Yu Un-hai's body and the residual energy in the valley combined to show a wide effect. What is this? Yu Un-hai's body shook as she asked with confusion. Just sit still. Don't come. Ah, no, Captain Nim. This isn't a joke, no matter what, Captain Nim. I had the lightning god technique, so I stepped into the river in the valley. And there was no effect as I walked up to Yu Un-hai. Yu Un-hai stared at me blankly. I said flatly, didn't I say it? I have a lightning skill. Is that right? Great, Captain Nim. From now on, I will work on matching the wavelengths. Close your eyes and concentrate on the skill. Loyalty. I will do as you say. Yu Un-hai instantly relaxed. I placed my hand on Yu Un-hai's breast. Huck, quiet. Yu Un-hai bit her lips. I moved the power stored from Lightning God technique into Yu Un-hai's body. It would be easier if Lightning God was awake, but right now it was sleeping due to eating all the magic power. I had to do the task by hand. It isn't as hard as I thought. Was it because of the electric current skill? I could clearly see the direction of electric current inside Yu Un-hai's body. I followed the direction of electric current. It was moving randomly rather than in a cycle. The passive skill couldn't be controlled but of the direction it was flowing in. It was possible to adjust and correct it to a certain extent. Imagine a faucet. The amount of water released would be adjusted according to each twist so you can control the skill. From now on, remember what I am telling you and how it feels. Yu Un-hai needed to feel how electric current moved. The method of controlling electric current was given to her. Even the slightest knowledge would cause a wide difference. It was up to Yu Un-hai whether she accomplished it or not. The skill rating might rise. Yu Un-hai had received the protection of a lightning spirit. It wasn't impossible to change or raise the rating of the skill. I inwardly spurred on the task. Looking at the shoulders before attacking. This is correct. The shoulders will move shortly before the weapon is wielded. But looking in the eyes of the opponent is more certain. If you can perceive the subtle differences, then victory is yours. There is clearly a transition point where the opponent will switch between defending and attacking. Identify it. It will be easier to hit. Linkage. You just need to the right link. If you pull them one by one, then you will be able to face a strong opponent. Krasla lectured the people. The members were gathered together while Krasla diagnosed the way they used the weapons. You have short hands. A thick sword like a bastard sword would be suitable. You lack flexibility in your wrist. This is a fatal weakness for an archer. Shouldn't you use a crossbow instead? Why is a bard holding a dagger? Self-defense? I'd rather you hold a harp. That would be better. His knowledge was beyond that of Yu Un-hai and Li Ji-hai. The next day, a blacksmith arrived to get the dimensions of the body and custom weapons were produced. The weapons arrived exactly 3 days later and Krasla's ruthless sparring was established. Attack all together. You should move according to your particular level. But the conditions are the same. Anybody that manages to hurt me will be excluded from any training. They couldn't say no. Every day was a series of hell training where they couldn't do anything. In addition, there was no possibility of their levels lowering. Everyone had fire burning in their eyes as they held their weapons. Bam, peok, but there was still a large slamming sound. Everyone was sick and tired as they stretched out on the floor while Krasla lectured them. It was good that you read me. However, you responded too fast. This will give the enemy time to judge you. Kim Chun-won. There is no answer. A total impasse. I might recommend to master a quick suicide. A magician has to believe their colleagues. They will act as proper shields, so you should freely use your magic. You should trust in them a bit more. The training continued the next day, and the next day. Eventually the new members were affected by the heat. It's a scam. Our levels can't match you. We are just punching bags. He just wants to break us. Hee hee. Kim Chun-won was half insane. Kim Chun-won's spirit was becoming increasingly strange as Krasla defeated him. He had been conceited, but now he encountered someone much stronger than him. Of course, that wasn't just confined to Kim Chun-won. They were learning how to deal with a very strong opponent. Naturally it was hard. Once Krasla pushed them in the lessons, it was then the turn of Captain Randolph Briggseel. It is electric massage time. The complexion of the members turned pale. The training was hard but not enough to make them want to die. But the electric massage was different. It was so terrifying that they really feared death. Just thinking about it made them want to die. The electric massage could be called a hell massage. Kim Chun-won had the bad luck to be the first target. Just relax. The most terrible words came from the mouth of the commander. Relax by going to the afterlife? Kim Chun-won felt an instinctive fear and turned to run, but Krasla appeared out of nowhere and grabbed him. Kim Chun-won grudgingly had to give up. In fact, the electric massage itself wasn't a big deal. It felt like power was inserted into the body to relieve the muscles. But the problem was the pain before that started. Grr. Kim Chun-won bit his lip and didn't make a sound. The captain finally let go. It is strange since it took longer than usual. But that ended instantly. Next, there was no one who would volunteer. They were too busy looking at each other. Kim Chun-won thought bleakly about their future. They were like new, laboratory mice caught in a cage. A hole to escape out of didn't exist. However, there was one exception. One person had no worries. It was Yoo Eun-hye. Ah, cool, only she was free from the harmful electric massage. It was due to her lightning skill. Eyes followed her with envy and jealousy. Yoo Eun-hye just laughed awkwardly at them. Thus the short and long 3 weeks passed by quickly. Today was the last day of training. There was an excited mood. They were finally free from the hell training, so there was a bright smile on their faces. And I finally had the time to check the system. I opened up Mind's Eye to look at the status window. I first looked at Yoo Eun-hye. Name: Yoo Eun-hye. Occupation: Hero, Lightning Magician. Title: dozen lightning strikes. R. Magic +4. Stats: Strength 28, Intelligence 56. Agility 26, Stamina 25. Magic Power 55, +4. Potential: 190 +4 423. Uniqueness: has received the protection of the Spirit of Lightning. A state received after being hit by lightning and standing on the door between life and death. Skill: Lightning Bolt, XN, Electric Current, R, Passive. Before and after comparison: Strength 20, Intelligence 44, Agility 15, Stamina 14, Magic 49, Potential 138, +4 423. Strength 28, Intelligence 56, Agility 26, Stamina 25, Magic 59, Potential 190, +4 423. Only a few months. There was a remarkable growth compared to the first status window I saw. Furthermore, the rating of Electric Current and Lightning Bolt had risen. Especially in the case of the passive, with the power efficiency was strengthened. I turned my head and checked Lee Ji-hye this time. She also showed significant growth. Name: Lee Ji-hye. Occupation: Hero, Water Magician. Title: None. Stats: Strength 24, Intelligence 44. Agility 23, Stamina 29. Magic Power 48. Potential: 168 +277. Uniqueness: none. Skill: Water Sphere, N. Before and after comparison: Strength 22, Intelligence 41, Agility 18, Stamina 26, Magic 35, Potential 142 277. Strength 24, Intelligence 44, Agility 23, Stamina 29, Magic 48, Potential 168 277. It was fairly steep compared to when I first met her in the dungeon. It was good growth considering her low potential. In addition, the 4 new members showed a satisfactory growth for only 3 weeks. Their physical abilities had increased from 3 to 8. But it wasn't simply their stats that had risen. They learned the basic foundation behind using their weapons. They were absolutely different from before. All of them looked confident. They might have wept for 3 weeks, but there was no comparison for before. I think they are ready. Ranking competition, Heaven's Will. Finally, my group was perfectly equipped. These guys should be properly listed on the roster. I would eat those people from Heaven's Will. Devil hunters would bite those fellows. Of course, I hadn't forgotten the names on the list that Kim Yong-woo gave me. I would sweep them up in the ranking competition. I faintly smiled. Taking care of it with my own hands? I looked forward to the ranking competition in a few days. Chapter 43 to 44. Ranking competition. Ranking competition. It was only a few days until the competition that would divide the awakened into ranks. Kim Yong-woo leaked the information to all the other guilds and used a banner on the homepage of the Awakened Cafe to attract attention. It was a rare opportunity to see the Awakened fight. The other guilds could also confirm the strength of Heaven's Will. Kim Yong-woo generously used his money. The ranking competition was held at the transformed Seoul World Cup Stadium. He rented an enormous lobby. The admission was free. Famous celebrities were also invited. Anything else? Information about the teams participating in the ranking competition were also promoted. There was no need to say that Kim Yong-woo's account balance decreased significantly. However, Kim Yong-woo didn't scrimp on the costs. It was a cheap investment if it would preserve his position as guild master. The reaction was hot. News about it hit the individual stations and newspapers, and the reporters were all talking about it. In particular, the large cable TV channels were spreading the news about the Awakened. It was possible to raise a large amount of profits from the ranking tournament. At this point, the famous guilds that were watching started feeling itchy. The name of Heavenswell would rise significantly among the public. Do you want to participate in the ranking competition? Yes. Each guild can have one raid group participate. Specifically proceed. Come up with the most powerful configuration for the raid group. Kim Yong-woo didn't mind. Kim Yong-woo was hoping to get more attention from the audience. Thus, he was determined to involve all 5 guilds. Even though each guild could only have one raid group, that was enough to cause a huge stir. Determining who was stronger among the Awakened was a subject of constant attention in the public. In addition, there was an intense rivalry among the 5 guilds. No one could predict the results if the strongest teams from the 5 guilds participated. The expectations of the public and the Awakened rose to an unprecedented level. The strongest would win the tournament. That perception was embedded in everyone's mind. People came from all over the country to watch the competition. The interested foreigners and Awakened from overseas also got on the planes. Wealth has come to Korea. Kim Yong-woo had a dark smile on his face. Bam-ba-bam tilde. The huge sound of trumpets. An orchestra wearing white were lined up and playing wind instruments. A magnificent performance that contributed to an inspiring atmosphere. After it finished, cheerleaders entered the center of the stadium. Their uniform was a short skirt and top that exposed their navel. The shiny red and blue dressed females danced wildly and sensually. Weak. The mouths of the men naturally rose. The Seoul World Cup stadium that could house 64,000 people currently had 40,000. And that number was still steadily rising. The cheerleaders finished, and then it was the turn of the invited singers. Mori. A famous idol group had been invited, Mori. This 5-member group had outstanding skills and was currently a hot topic in South Korea. An outstanding sight. The atmosphere was further heightened. After Mori was sent off, members from Heavenswell including Kim Yong-woo appeared. Exactly 168 people. They were the members of Heavenswell participating in the competition. In particular, Kim Yong-woo was here to speak some words as the host of the competition. Kim Yong-woo grabbed the microphone and said with a smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ranking competition. Welcome. I am the leader of the Heavenswell Guild, Kim Yong-woo." After the formal greetings, Kim Yong-woo turned his head. These are the proud faces of the people from Heavenswell who will participate in the ranking competition. There were 21 raid groups in this place, but I've also issued a special invitation to 4 other raid groups. The rankings for these 25 raid groups will soon be decided. An exciting feast that will make your heart pound. Who will win? Tension filled the faces of all the participants. It was the same for the visitors. Kim Yong-woo laughed. Then I hope you enjoy the 3-day festival, and I will end the boring speech here. Thank you. Wah! The deafening shouts. The ranking competition had now started. Preliminaries. It would choose what raid group would advance to the main round. Half of the 21 Heavenswell raid groups were scheduled to fall in the preliminaries. The 4 special raid groups were invited so they would advance to the main round. It was naturally for the participants' eyes to fill with fire. Captain Nim, our first opponent is called Black Panther? Kim Chun-won said while they were in the waiting room. Lee Ji-hai replied, that is the name of the raid group. All 8 people in it helped establish the Heavenswell Guild. They are equipped with several good equipment and have considerable skills. It won't be easy to fight them from the beginning. Are you afraid of being hurt? I asked, and Lee Ji-hai shook her head. It's not like that. Isn't there a shield that blocks a certain amount of shock? There are also sleeping potions in the warehouse. I'm just a little worried that we are meeting a strong group like Black Panther at the beginning. Participants in the competition would carry real swords and weapons. There were some safety measures. The right to hold some shield items. Enchanters had worked with blacksmiths to create a shock absorber. The shield would last throughout the battle until it broke. If the shield broke in the struggle, then that member would be left out of the team. There were also numerous sleeping potions prepared in the warehouse. A number of potions found from the dungeon would be committed to the ranking competition. The physical burden was significantly less, but Lee Ji-hai was still worried. They needed to win against a strong raid group. It felt like someone was influencing the bracket. There's no need to worry. You guys don't need to do anything. It was true that they trained for 3 weeks, but they were still at a human standard. Their weapon handling, technique and skills couldn't be compared to the opponent. A wall-mounted TV in the waiting room relayed videos of the tournament. The first preliminary was the Akbari raid group against the Mistake group. Akbari was the raid group where Kim Tae-won was the leader. In the list that Kim Yong-woo handed over, Kim Tae-won's name was on the side of the Devil Hunters. His words in the elevator really was advice. "What, is this imitating the special forces?" Kim Chun-won muttered in a small voice. The members of Akbari had ink marks on their faces and were wearing orange shirts. The shirt had "Victory" written on it in traditional characters. Victory, it wasn't guaranteed. At the same time, the whistle was blown to announce the start of the ranking competition. Doesn't the Akbari team have a lot of warriors? In contrast, the Mistake team has their close and long-ranged attackers appropriately placed. Yoon Hai said from next to me. Looking at it simply, Akbari seemed to be at a disadvantage. They only had warriors, so they couldn't cover the gap. Defense was limited. In addition, the guarder on the enemy team could prevent the attacks while long-ranged attacks were used. Then the voice of a broadcaster came from the speakers attached to the TV. Unbelievable. The powerful assault of the Akbari raid group. Hasn't the guarder raised his shield? It will enter into a melee. Foolish. Look here. Haven't there already been some people with broken shields? Kim Yoo-won, it is impossible for him to continue. Ah, that must hurt. Even so, Akbari isn't stopping their assault. The best Mistake has fallen into chaos. But isn't a black light coming from Kim Tae-won? What is that skill? Magic power cohesion. A skill that raises the cutting force of the sword. Ah, Mistake's guarder is unable to block it and was pushed back. In the end, it turned into a melee. Huh, a great breakthrough power. Mistake's long-distance members are sticking to the same skills. Keep their eyes open or a mistake will occur. It seems to be almost over. It is obvious they would be hurt after failing to block the opponent's hit. This ranking competition, they are still lacking, but it is rather interesting. Let's continue. There was an overwhelming response after Akbari was decided as the winners. It reminded the audience of gladiators fighting in a coliseum, so there was a hot response. I've done some research on Black Panther in advance. Do you want to know about their formation and operation? Lee Ji-hai suggested after realizing the importance of tactics. It wasn't simply gathering 8 people together but also involved psychological warfare. But I said firmly, there is no need, huh? Krasla and I are good enough. Captain Nim, the stories about the Black Panther raid. I hate to say it twice. I understand. Lee Ji-hai nodded. She knew that I wasn't helpless. It also wasn't strange if she thought Krasla was stronger than me. However, this time was different. It was very desirable. People were trying to contain the Devil Hunters raid group. The ones who wrote the bracket. Maybe Kim Yong-woo didn't even get a chance to touch the bracket list. Lee Ji-hai wanted to smash Black Panther in order to change the impression of them. Devil Hunters raid group. Devil Hunters, come with me please. Your preliminaries will begin in 5 minutes. A yellow-dressed helper opened the door of the lobby and yelled. Our turn had come. Tension filled the eyes of all the members except for Krasla. I took the lead. Let's go. My mouth was in a smirk. An overwhelming force. I would make sure to use this opportunity to clearly show it. Spacious ground. There was a line between the 16 people. However, there were differences in their formations. Black Panther had 4 people in the front and 4 people behind, while Devil Hunters had 2 people in front with 6 people in the rear. In particular, the members of Devil Hunters were all wearing skull masks. But they didn't give off an intimidating presence, so the opponents and spectators were puzzled. What do you think? They aren't guarders. Of course, I was in the front lines along with Krasla. And the reason we stood in front, Beak, Kung, it was to bridge the gap between the opponents. I wouldn't even give them time to breathe. The moment the whistle sounded, I pushed off strongly against the ground. Dust rose as I arrived in front of the opponent. Quadjik. There was no need for swords. I advanced too fast. My fist hit the other person in the abdomen. Keng. The shock absorption shield broke. The necklace that the shield was attached to broke. A single clash. Neither defense or offense. Just a one-sided strike. You weak. The opponent coughed out blood before collapsing. But that wasn't all. I used the residual power of lightning god technique the moment I made a fist. This meant, the lightning power would gnaw at the blood vessels and cells and would slowly kill the person. Of course, the future of the humans had already been somewhat decided. The Black Panther raid group was one of those slandering the devil hunters. It couldn't end simply with one blow. I needed to pop that attitude of theirs. I would finish them off before they could even start. Cake. Krasla thrust his spear at the opponent's body. He had spun it round and round before striking. The shield was destroyed and the body received considerable damage. Sheep and wolf? No. It was like a tiger, lion and wasps hunting sheep. It was like the scene of thousands of worker bees being massacred. They were no match for us. It was like a storm was striking them. The members of Black Panther collapsed one by one until they were all on the floor. What, this? The bleachers were quiet. Even the broadcasters couldn't say anything. A scene that reminded them of something beyond the standards. Beat. The whistle that blew sounded louder than ever. Swept away. We fought 3 more times and Krasla and I ended it every time. We were the raid group that dealt the most injuries. After the first day of qualifiers finished, the videos were spread over the internet. The netizens felt envy as they saw the many attractions and the performance of the idol group Mori. But among these stories, many of them were about the raid group Devil Hunters. Devil Hunters raid group? They seem too strong. No other raid group can match them. Aren't they like Barcelona? Heaven's Will isn't weak. We still don't know. The strongest in each guild hasn't come out yet. Only 2 people in Devil Hunters finished the match. Nothing has been seen from the remaining 6. The reactions were divided into 2 types. But they had to admit that the 2 members were strong enough to end things. Public opinion wondered about ways to deal with Devil Hunters. Everyone searched for exclusive methods to defeat the Devil Hunters. But they realized such methods were useless the next day. The second day, it was the main competition. The skull mask wearing Devil Hunters had risen to the top. Their attitude was more casual than yesterday. I don't know why they would be worried. In the end, there were only 2 protagonists on the stage. I had to admit that I made a scene on the first day. Now, the biggest issue that has surfaced is the appearance of the raid group Devil Hunters. Their opponent is the strongest raid group of the Mithril Guild, Grizzly. Weren't there some shocking moves yesterday? The broadcasters looked at the stage with expectations in their eyes. Yesterday's preliminaries were only held with the Heaven's Will Guild. But today, the main competition was different. The strongest raid group from one of the 4 guilds. In fact, before yesterday it had been expected that Grizzly would be the winner. Beat. At the same time, the whistle was blown to announce the start of the match. But no one moved. All 8 members of Grizzly were wary of Krasla and I. I read their intentions in an instant. They intend to wrap around both of us. I smiled. They could try but they wouldn't be able to catch my ankles. Garter. Strengthen shield. Strengthen shield. Chuck. Chuck. The 4 garters started moving in a unit. It would act as both defense and offense and seemed to be a provocation. Power of breath. There was even a blessing from a priest? The formation was extremely defense-focused. It was certainly a strong formation to deal with a powerhouse. They intended to wait until I exhausted myself piercing the defenses. But this was a different situation from normal. I pulled out Wrath for the first time in this competition. My strength that reached 86 wasn't something that could be stopped by the garters and priest. Quang. The shield's surface rippled before exploding in all directions. Ah, is that the effect of the item? Amazing. None of them thought the results would be pure power. They thought it was the effect of Wrath. Quang. Quang. There were wild screams every time the shield exploded. The garters stepped back and retreated but were mercilessly struck by Krasla's spear. The Mithril Guild's strongest raid group, Grizzly. But the scene wasn't much different from the preliminaries. This was halfway to the finals. The raid group Devil Hunters hadn't been defeated yet. There were no rivals for the Devil Hunters. The other team would definitely be broken. It wasn't just the performance of only 2 people. There were only 4 people left, the rest of the members would handle it. The opposing team was already helpless due to our attacks and couldn't fight back. It was similar to dealing with leftovers but the members didn't have any complaints. They knew that they could reach this point thanks to me. The competition had already been decided from the start. In the end, no surprises happened. S rank. The ultimate proof indicated South Korea's strongest raid group. It was the moment the name Devil Hunters became known to the public. After refusing numerous interview requests, I returned to the dungeon. Devil Hunters were nationally recognized and each of the awakened had the S rank attached to them. The ultimate title that only belonged to the strongest raid group. There was no need to raise a fuss. It was to the level that I wanted. Thanks to this, I can accelerate my plan. I had originally planned to slowly increase the influence of my raid group. Thanks to Kim Yong-woo and the ranking competition, I could progress much faster. In my previous life, there wasn't the ranking competition. There were many awakened that competed against each other but they weren't divided into ranks. In the future, the awakened would cooperate with each other depending on their country. But the ranking competition that Kim Yong-woo developed thanks to my presence had changed the future. I had only come back here for a little over a year. The clear image of the awakened? I thought it would take 3 years for my plan. I don't need to bother with such a troublesome thing. My plan had been reduced by 2 years. If I returned to the guild and trained the members, then the time would be dramatically reduced. But there was no need to do such an annoying thing. It is time to prepare a monster wave. Monster wave. A large number of monsters would escape the dungeon to invade the country. I had been preparing the dungeon. My original plan was to execute it 2 years later after obtaining the title of the strongest, so I had been preparing all year for it. I arrived at the top floor of the dungeon and lightly touched Yi's forehead, who was dozing against the dungeon core. Ya, Aish, who? Yi frowned while waking up and rubbed her eyes a few times. It is good. I just fell asleep. Yi has been waiting for Master to return. The saliva at her mouth indicated that it was an obvious lie. I ignored it and asked, "That's okay. How many points are left?" Wait a minute. After using 100,000 points to purchase the elixir, there is 163,752 points left. It is slightly lacking. I had used most of my points buying things from the auction. Of course, my balance was bankrupt, but I didn't regret it. Yi was confused. Why, Master? Did you want to use the points? I want to buy a few ogres and twin-head ogres. It is incredibly lacking. Yi tried to calculate it while talking. The advanced ogre was 40,000 points while the twin-head ogres was 250,000 points. I had 160,000 points, so 4 ogres was the limit. I couldn't even dream of obtaining a twin-head ogre. I stroked my chin for a moment before saying, "Convene the dark elves and dwarves. I need them to do some work." Chapter 45 to 47, Dungeon Attack Record. The dungeon's 6th floor. I changed the terrain using domestic mode. I've completed the ecology up to the 5th floor, but the 6th floor was still empty. I was hoping to raise some special creatures there, but changing the terrain itself required points. I used roughly 100,000 points and changed a large chunk of the 6th floor to lava. Kururung. The transformation of the dungeon's 6th floor started. First, the ground split apart. A volcano would intermittently pop up every 30 meters. 5 volcanoes were created in this manner and they started spewing out lava. The specified lava zone was completed. Of course, it couldn't end here. I placed the 3LV creature, Pyrock Larva, on the lava field. The Pyrock Larva was a creature that cost 1,200 point. It was expensive for a palm-sized larva, but I bought 40 of them. There was no hesitation as I purchased it. They will duplicate once they become adults. Once the Pyrock larva grew into an adult, it could live outside. The red larva would grow to 3 times its size before unraveling and forming an intermediate creature approximately 1 meter in size with the tail of a dragon and the wings of a bat. But the Pyrock weren't often sold as adults. It was because 99% of the larvae died before becoming adults. There was a need for very strict management, so the dark elves and dwarves were called. I need to find the source of magic power associated with the creature. The Pyrock was a creature that lived on stones containing fire magic power. The volcano and lava meant the fire magic could be instinctively felt. I bought the Pyrock larva due to the above reasons. Yi looked at me with confusion. Master, it is very hard to raise the Pyrock larva. The adults are very strong, but Yi knows that they aren't easy to raise. Although they are already purchased. I know, doesn't the store sell adults? Yi thinks you should just get an adult Pyrock. I saw a very cute one. Yi didn't believe in my skills. In addition, Yi was curious about why I was raising them. I wanted the Pyrocks for one specific reason. The dungeon contains 4 altars of different magic properties. I need to find the fire altar. This was also information he obtained from his previous life. If the 4 altars with different properties were found, then it was possible to raise more powerful advanced creatures. I would use the Pyrocks to find the altar. It would be good if they found the altar. I confirmed in my previous life that it gave achievements. And releasing the more advanced creatures would kill more humans and wouldn't bring me benefits. But things were different now. I stood at the peak of the awakened in South Korea. A monster wave would stir up the awakened and would shake the country. I stood at the peak, but it currently lacked impact. I was free to do a monster wave if I wanted. There was one obvious effect. Standing at the peak position, a monster wave was a golden opportunity to become recognized by other awakened and civilians. More than anything else, the leaders of this country aren't taking the situation seriously enough. After identifying the movements of the creatures in the dungeon, there has only been a lukewarm response. I need to break that perception. South Korea, the vast majority of people were hanging on to the security measures. There was the issue of North Korea, but they were slow to cope with the dungeon. There had to be a real threat to make the country move. It was inevitable that the country's leaders would use the dungeon as a propaganda tool. It was something I saw in my previous life. The awakened need to be more desperate in order to grow. A competitive environment. And, if I become a symbol, then it will be a big boost when hitting other dungeons. It was a choice I would make for the future. In addition, the awakened would raise awareness by protecting the civilians, and they would desperately fight to become stronger for their survival. Those with a sense of entitlement would use it as a driving force behind their corruption. I would be able to cut off the rotten ones. There was another reason. This was an opportunity to debut Chrisley. I intended to make her appear as the dungeon master. The conclusion of my plan. It would be a while before the creatures could find the altar. My points were scarce, so I couldn't use it at the moment. Master? Yi spoke in a puzzled tone. I began to talk with a relaxed expression. Yi, are the dark elves and dwarves gathered together? They were gathered a while ago. Do you want Yi to call them? Yes. I nodded, and Yi flapped her wings quickly. It is great to see Dungeon Master. It is great to see Dungeon Master. The dark elves and dwarves. They kneeled down before me. Chrisley was included among the dark elves. Moreover, she seemed even more beautiful. She was at a level of the goddess of beauty, and even I was forced to admire her. I didn't easily go crazy with desire over women, but this. I opened up mind's eye. I wanted to see the results after 1 month. Name. Chrisley. Occupation none. Title * person with the blood of a true demonic dragon. Epic. Intelligence +6, magic power +6. * blessed by the moon. XU, magic power +8. Stats. Strength 26, intelligence 94, +6. Agility 28, stamina 32. Magic power 55, +18. Potential. 235 +24, 478. Uniqueness. A person with the true demonic dragon Aogen and the dark elf Sheila's blood, the end of her growth can't be seen. Skill. Body control, R, undead manufacturing, U. Before and after comparison. Strength 23, intelligence 100, agility 21, stamina 27, magic 60, potential 211 +20, 478. Strength 26, intelligence 100, agility 28, stamina 32, magic 73, potential 235 +24, 478. The Death Wand gave an addition 4 magic power. After her health was restored, her stats rose up rapidly. But I was surprised to see that body control had transformed into a rare skill. It had only been 1 month. Body control had risen from the normal rating to rare. Is this the power of 100 intelligence? The growth rate of the skill was unbelievable. After a few months, it didn't seem impossible for body control to reach the unique rating. The same was true for undead manufacturing. Anyway, it was good that someone under my command had grown. I shook my head and opened my mouth. Do any of you have experience leading an army? 2 people raised their hands. Dark Elf Julium and Dwarf Stein. Both of them were leaders of their village. Only 2? It will depend on your criteria of the army, Dungeon Master. Julian carefully expressed his opinion. Leading more than 500 would be good. Then there are 2 more people. 3 dark elves. I moved my line of sight. Dwarves? 1 more. A total of 5. That should be okay. I couldn't randomly release the monster wave. A commanding presence was needed to lead them. The 5 of you step forward. Chrisley is permitted to take 2 steps. Chrisley moved forward with the 5 people behind her. The dark elves and dwarves gathered together. Chrisley was 2 steps away. A week later, the first monster wave will take place. It will be composed of 5,000 orcs, kobolds and gnolls and will create trouble for the humans. Dungeon Master. The first? Julian asked an appropriate question. The first monster wave is just a device intended to awaken the humans' awareness. Except for Chrisley, you 5 will step out. It doesn't matter if the creatures are lost, but all leaders have to return safely. The next monster wave will occur after 2 months. At that time, Chrisley will be in charge of the mission. In addition, the quality of their creatures will change. The first wave would just be a teaser. I clenched my fists tightly and said, "Time is running out. First, I will assign 1,000 creatures to each commander. You have a week to train them in the basics. Go forth from the dungeon and devastate the humans. As you command, as you command." The 6 commanders including Chrisley bowed their heads deeper. The remaining dark elves and dwarves will have a separate task. They will take care of the pyrock larva that I've released on the 6th floor. After the pyrock larva sticks out from the ground, letting them rest for 30 minutes is enough. There is a place with no lava, so build houses to live in the area. I quickly divided their roles. The first wave that would take place after 1 week. I was busy preparing for the move. The 3rd and 4th floor were filled with 500 orcs, 4,500 kobolds and goblins. There were an additional 20 harpies and goblin and kobold bosses that would be part of the first wave. An army that humans could defeat. There were no nuclear weapons. It was different with tanks and fighter jets, but the regular infantry would find it difficult to deal with the creatures. Even if they were armed with modern weapons, there were no humans that didn't fear death. Kung, kung. The footprints of the creatures rang through the dungeon. The creatures were neatly lined up on the dungeon's 1st floor. I raised my right hand as I slowly moved forward. Let's move out. Let's move out. Kung, kung. The army of 5,000 creatures left the dungeon while being led by the 5 commanders. The South Korean troops near Bukon Mountain. A number of soldiers were deployed in case the creatures emerged from the dungeon. It wasn't easy for civilians to reach here, and they were positioned in a place where they could observe the entrance. But it had been more than a year and the creatures hadn't left the dungeon. Discipline had been neglected and now it was just a routine patrol. The troops stationed at the dungeon brought entertainment such as a pack of cards. 5 matches. I'm sorry, I also have a match. They were playing at the table originally used for operation planning. They squandered money and now there were only 2 people remaining. But now it seemed to be ending. The soldier who lost money had a long face. That is our Captain Nim. Just a little bit is acceptable. Huh. Today Captain Nim should buy chicken for the kids of our squadron. The captain tsked at his men. You rascals, you think that I should buy chicken for the kids? I'm going to use the money to go and see Madame Jung. It was at that moment, just as all the money was being swept up, the door opened and someone came in. The captain frowned. You should knock before you come in. Captain Nim, it is serious. A monster wave. The captain laughed. Are you high? You must be dreaming or something. That friend's words are a little strange. The other soldiers also laughed. Tiong. But more patrolling soldiers kept entering through the door and the atmosphere changed. Monster wave. An estimated number of more than 4,000. The creatures are exiting the dungeon. Tang. Ta-tang. Gunshots resounded from all over the mountain. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air. Son of a bitch. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. The armored vehicles were blindly firing machine guns at the goblins. A few distracted goblins were killed. The creatures didn't fear death. The soldiers at the front all received the same fate. The goblins attacked while neglecting their lives. Cake. In a brief instant, the soldier's face was instantly torn in half by the sharp teeth of the goblins. The soldiers were instantly killed. It was a gory sight, but at least they didn't have to suffer from being eaten alive. Kiek. Something penetrated through the forehead of the goblin that was eating the soldier's neck. The goblin was riddled with hundreds of holes from bullets. The soldiers near the body opened fire. Die scum. The soldiers frowned at the sight. There were the remains of vomit at the corners of their mouths. This scene was very common here. The creatures didn't fear death, but the soldiers definitely did. The permanent post at Buchan Mountain had received a surprise ambush. There was no radio contact under conditions like these. The soldiers used the bullets and grenades in their arsenal and barely survived. There were already a shootout against the creatures inside the garrison. Out of 150 soldiers, only 10 barely survived. Their faces had already darkened. "Captain Nim, are you okay? Shit, do I look like I'm okay? All the wounded people, follow me. Move." They didn't know. There might be more creatures in the vicinity. The troops would have no future if they met the orcs. The wounded soldiers started moving. But who knew that it would be like he said? Queek, queek, shit. The captain cursed as he heard the familiar rough breathing of an orc. The 7-Eleven near Buxan Mountain. Today a convenience store worker called Kim Gun Sam gulped as a scantily clad woman wearing a fine silver blouse and short hot pants entered. "Welcome, Tilda." The woman ignored him and went to the corner where the tampons were. Kim Gun Sam secretly admired her while drinking. HYA. Look at that rear. The curve of her butt was emphasized by the hot pants. It was natural for the eyes to be drawn there. A person who works in the nightlife. I often see women like this in the red light district. Hee hee. The value of the land around Buchan Mountain had dropped due to the dungeon. It was dangerous working near a dungeon, but he had grudgingly accepted the job at the convenience store. He had been working the part-time job for a couple of days. His mind had transformed into an oasis. There were plenty of cheap entertainment places near the convenience store. The woman placing items on the counter had that good feel. Kim Gun Sam looked at the cold wind blowing outside. She must be freezing. She was sexy, but there were disadvantages to it. Kim Gun Sam coughed and said, "Hum, 8,800 won. Would you like an envelope? That value should be covered by you." "Huh? My ass, didn't you keep staring at it?" "I don't know what you are talking about, customer Nim," Kim Gun Sam hastily said with embarrassment. And how did this woman know when she didn't even turn her head? His conscience pricked, but he had to deny it. The woman stared at Kim Gun Sam. "Should we check the CCTV? You were definitely looking at my ass." Why did this woman know that he was staring? This day? Kim Gun Sam was about to protest when he saw something outside the glass windows. "Look, CC. What? Eobobo." Kim Gun Sam's finger trembled as he pointed outside. The woman turned with a frown, but she soon showed the exact same reaction as Kim Gun Sam. Ah, creatures. Both of them were gazing towards the same place. Hundreds of creatures were moving on foot. Monster wave, the phenomenon that involved creatures coming out of the dungeon. It had already happened a few times in other countries, but South Korea officially had the 5th monster wave. The soldiers stationed near the dungeon sacrificed themselves but weren't able to repel the advance of the creatures. The creatures that came down from Buchan Mountain immediately attacked Gangbuk GU and Yunpyeong GU. GU equals district. The residents were evacuated after noticing the existence of the creatures, but Uidong, Suyudong and Galhyandong. Dong equals neighborhoods in the districts. Uidong and Suyudong equals Gangbuk GU. Galhyandong equals Yunpyeong GU, were destroyed. In fact, many people were already concerned. It was common sense that a monster wave would ravage cities near the area. But the media and government talked about the soldiers stationed there, so the people believed that creatures would be tied up in the dungeon. However, the military's response was dull. Central Seoul's economy, culture and transportation couldn't cope with it. As a result, the casualties reached 1,732 people. When including the wounded, it reached over 2,000 people. They succeeded in repelling the creatures that emerged from the dungeon, but it caused them a massive headache. So they are trying to hit the dungeon. I was watching the scene while relaxing from the top floor of the dungeon. The dungeon core was showing it through a hologram, so I was entertained. The pride of the army might have been crushed if the awakened hadn't joined them. It was the perfect response of an idiot. There was an intense surge of magic power inside the tower. What was magic power? Originally, it was the fundamental power. It was the source of modern civilization in human hands. They gnawed on the source instead of using it properly. Even if it worked, I didn't get any bad feelings from it. The awakened could use the magic power to use modern weapons more efficiently. But an army consisting of normal humans trying to invade an army? I started laughing. Killing ordinary people won't give any points, but only the existence of the awakened gave points. Other dungeon creatures and demons also gave points, but normal humans were worth nothing. Of course, a public massacre would earn him some achievements, contributing to the destruction of the earth. And if I killed 100 million people, then a title and achievement could be obtained. I would rather receive the contributions from killing the demons. Killing everyone in South Korea would be insufficient to reach 100 million. It was very tedious work. It was better to use the demons. I should give a gift to Chrisley. The volume produced with undead manufacturing will be fun. I smiled as I determined the future of those entering the dungeon. Anyway, using the undead manufacturing skill would raise the proficiency. It was recycling, but it didn't feel good to have my dungeon ignored. Before the monster wave happened, the army had ignored me for North Korea. What did that mean? They seemed to be looking down on me. My army only consisted of 5,000 low-level creatures, but I will welcome them as the dungeon master. Of course, I wouldn't be greeting them directly. I wasn't going to show my official appearance. An army of humans meeting the dungeon master? It didn't fit. It was different from the awakened entering in large numbers. Even then, only a few creatures handled them. After summarizing my thoughts, I had Krasla gather the dark elves. The dwarves were left alone. Right now they needed to take care of the Pyrock. And the propagating harpies were in charge of the 20 mud golems and 30 puppets on the 5th floor. Kuong, Kuong. The 20 golems that were 4 meters high and weighing 2 tons were lined up in a row. They were made of hardened mud refined through alchemy and magic. Among the intermediate creatures, there were none that was inferior to them. Next to them were the 30 puppets made out of metal in the form of human beings. The dark elves had climbed up one by one on both shoulders of the mud golem. They are armed with a bow and short dagger. The dark elves could shoot arrows in the dark and could swing their knife quickly like an assassin. In addition, the synergy with the dungeon meant that the dark elves were invincible against the humans. Their number reached 40. The combined total of 120 wasn't a large amount. Stop. Waruruk, the fire horse, Inferno. Krasla was sitting on Inferno. The magic earrings were removed and his original appearance was regained. In addition, there was an extremely determined look in his eyes. Inferno has been entrusted to me. In other words, I had to launch an overwhelming force that will devastate the enemy. Dungeon Master. I directly lent him Inferno. He was a general and his enemy was a country. No matter how brief it was, Krasla had experience and knew how weak their army was. They couldn't use their tools and would be easily beaten. Tactics? Strategy? There was no need. A frontal attack, so I would completely break them. Krasla and his troops were on the 1st floor. Scouts confirmed that the enemy was 500 meters in front of them. Krasla raised his red spear. The enemies are in front. The dirty humans should withdraw their footsteps. Their numbers are plentiful but they are weak. We will trample on them for master. Joy rose in the eyes of the dark elves. They came from the demon world. A world where the strong ruled. It was natural for the weak to be stepped on. The dark elves might be weak in power, but this was a chance to prove their worth. They were pleased. Krasla extended his spear and kicked Inferno to move forward. Eyeing. Inferno started to run. Krasla shouted in a loud voice. Sweep through those guys without leaving one of them behind. The Philippines, China, India, France and South Korea. It was the order that the monster waves occurred in. With the exception of France that didn't have the dungeon secured properly in the first place, the troops stationed nearby rapidly coped with it. There were thousands of casualties and property damage due to the tanks, so the amount of people complaining were very high. The current government tried to reduce the danger of the dungeons through propaganda, but it only worked on certain groups. The damage and danger of the dungeon was enough to shake public opinion. In order to change the flow of this, a meeting was held in a secret bunker between the defense minister, president, head of the Security Council and the lieutenant general. Kwong, if this operation fails then we will all die. It should be fine, but didn't we lose contact with the team not long after they entered the dungeon? Lieutenant General Choi Chun-ji, did you install the wire connection directly? The president slammed his fist down on the table while the sweating Choi Chun-ji licked his lips. President Nim, don't worry, the power of the special division is unbeatable. The creatures won't be able to stop their firepower. Lieutenant General Choi Chun-ji, it is obvious that they will sweep through the dungeon. The problem is doing it with minimal damage. I can't relax, let alone breathe, until I know what is going on. Lieutenant Choi Chun-ji had a frustrated heart. Didn't he know how great the power of one division was? A division specially organized to handle the dungeon. The Armed Special Forces contained K-101 and K-2 armored tanks, which were considered as the strongest. It wasn't a power that the creatures could face. The soldiers also had the latest firearms. Don't worry, sir. Even though communication was lost, we can still receive from the signaler. We just need to wait a few hours and we shall receive very good news. Lieutenant Choi Chun-ji was confident. He couldn't be anything else. There were a number of political relationships tangled up in the dungeon, but it was just a matter of performance. It was easy to deal with the people's complaints. Thousands of creatures were wiped out, so Choi Chun-ji couldn't understand the president's attitude. The president's fist trembled. It must be like that. If you don't want your throat cut, by any means. Unlike Choi Chun-ji's hopeful observation, the situation of the soldiers wasn't very good. 8,000 people could easily move past the creatures, but as they got deeper into the dungeon, more things started to malfunction. First, the wire communications and radio were jammed. The tanks started emitting smoke and firearms stopped working. Division Commander Nim, all communications are jammed. It will take 5 hours for the signaler to return to the dungeon entrance. What do you want to do? Continue the operation. We can handle the creatures. The division commander firmly gave an order to continue the operation. The faces of the soldiers darkened as they heard those words. They already knew that the products of modern science would become jammed in the dungeon. The United States had already made their information about the dungeon public. No, they knew there was a high chance the operation wouldn't work. But the soldiers had to follow the command. A few of them spoke words of complaint. I have no interest in going up. One of the soldiers muttered to himself. The surrounding soldiers nodded their heads in agreement. Those with wealth and power only cared about the cores, but the soldiers felt frantic. They weren't interested in the inside of the dungeon. The awakened were the ones meant to deal with the dungeon. To capture the dungeon using only the strength of humans, it felt. What is that? Why is the ground shaking? Stop, Kawang, Kawuong. Suddenly a loud sound could be heard from a short distance away. The soldiers were puzzled and turned their flashlights and torches in the direction. A horse was approaching at a very fast speed. It was ridiculous, but the horse was on fire. Someone was riding on top of it. It was first time in their lives that they saw something like that. The mouths of the soldiers dropped open. The unusual horse was a surprising sight. But the soldiers lost their spirits the moment they saw something else. Dozens of huge golems. The sight was overwhelming. Next to them were shining metal dolls that moved quickly. Prepare to fight. Prepare to fight. It became a full-length battlefield. What was the reason for dividing the creatures between floors? This arrangement was solely conceived for the awakened. It could be used to raise them, increasing the points. But humans couldn't even step foot in the dungeon. There was no need to wait by dividing it among floors. In addition, the humans weren't awakened and couldn't resist the creatures inside the dungeon. Modern weapons were certainly powerful, but it was limited inside the dungeon. Almost all firearms jammed or caused a fatal error. Didn't they know that? Or were they ignoring it? Master, the humans are really stupid. If Master allows it, then Yi will make them go and bow down like dogs. Of course, there would be a tribute in exchange. A kiss is probably sufficient. Yi said while looking at the progress of the battle through the crystal ball. I had to admit that Yi was stupid, so I didn't have an answer for her. Yi quietly approached, but I raised my hand. I grabbed Yi between the thumb and index finger of my right hand and stared at the crystal ball. Shit, aim the muzzle correctly. It isn't firing properly. The focus of the scope is slightly changing. Throw grenades. The safety pin isn't pulled properly? It isn't popping out. Noisy. 8,000 soldiers were attacking. The bullets fired from the gun would move slightly away from the aimed target. If they closed their eyes and fired, then there would be friendly fire. A thrown grenade wouldn't explode, or the extent of the explosion would be reduced. Any golems hit were quickly restored. The dolls made of metal? They were a similar size to humans and had sharp blades. They were capable of stabbing and piercing. The division commander told them. Are the tanks moving? No. It will take time to repair the engine. None of the tanks are moving. Damn. The division commander frowned as he heard those words. The situation was rather disturbing. The grenades didn't even work properly. It was the first time he had seen modern weapons disabled like this. Swords. Take out your swords, the division commander shouted. The soldiers regained their spirits at the commander's loud voice. They immediately put away their guns and pointed their great swords at the incoming puppets. Kying. But the greatsword was only good for damaging biological existences. A common human that wasn't awakened couldn't damage the metal puppet. It was limited to just scratches. But the puppets were moderately put in check. The golems were very big, so their movements were slow. The real problem was the dark elves with dark skin riding them while wielding long spears. There was approximately 40 of them. But they couldn't be resisted. They moved in the darkness like shadows. The special forces struggled, but they had limits. They learned how to deal with humans but weren't prepared to face such strong creatures. The result was very bleak. After all, Kayak, the division commander about to order a retreat, was beheaded. Krasla, he had narrowed the distance with Inferno and swung his spear. The soldiers were helpless before his breakthrough power. The soldiers on the front lines started to die one by one. The Dark Elves quickly understood and only aimed at them. A chain of confusion, a situation that had exploded out of control. At this moment, they all sat down with despair. The security conference. The president leaned back in his chair and stared up at the ceiling with a pale expression. It had been 2 days since contact had been disconnected. As more time passed with no contact, the mood of the conference room sunk like they were at a funeral. Still, no contact? The president spoke in a voice mixed with phlegm while Lieutenant Choi Chun-ji kept his mouth tightly closed. It had been a few days with no contact, so the worst result must have happened. After a long moment, Lieutenant General Choi Chun-ji spoke up. I've sent a search party. Just wait a little longer. A little longer, a little longer. How long is a little bit? If this operation fails, then take off your clothes. Choi Chun-ji shut his mouth at the president's words. They all knew. Previously there were only 1,700 casualties, so it was difficult to imagine 8,000 people being wiped out. The special troops of South Korea. It would be fortunate if Choi Chun-ji's only consequence was taking off his clothes. At this time, the defense minister carefully spoke. President Nim, measures, we need to establish them. The president tapped his finger on the desk as he sighed. Apologize to the country. Is there any other method besides resigning? Sir, the results are still unknown. The soldiers might return after brilliantly performing the operation. Don't bother. I know a lot of people are dissatisfied with the current administration. The backlash will just get worse over time. The president continued with a determined expression. Okay, let's cover it up as much as possible. The next day, the news related to the dungeon and the soldiers were extremely limited. The information was deliberately concealed from all media, information agencies and organizations. Questions were just answered mechanically with ambiguous words like, soon there will be news. Even the portal sites weren't safe. A large amount of data was censored or deleted on the forums. But no matter how hard they tried to hide it, cracks started to form and they couldn't stop the water from rising. In the first place, it had been impossible to pull the wool over their eyes. After a month passed and the soldiers didn't return, public opinion completely turned against the current government. The awakened played a decisive role. Some guilds searched inside the dungeon and found the tanks that the soldiers had used. There weren't any bodies lying around, but it didn't look good. It was almost like a story. After a few days, uniformed zombies began to occasionally emerge on the first floor. The appearance of the soldiers wandering around was terrible. The public exploded like a spring. At first it was just a peaceful protest, but things couldn't be easily resolved. They were all parents or family of the soldiers. In the end, the president apologized by resigning and a number of candidates ran for the presidency. A reporter from the United States, John, also covered these series of events. It was titled, The Useless and Ridiculous Pride Along with Ignorance Caused the Worst Result. At the same time, he published a book called Dungeon Attack Record, that detailed the monster wave that took place in South Korea and heavily criticized the government. Thus, 2 months passed since the first monster wave occurred in South Korea. Chapter 48 to 54, Place of the Fallen Gods. I looked at the lava fields on the 6th floor filled with satisfaction. The adult pyrox that the dwarves and dark elves raised were flying around on wings. Except for the fact that their wings were similar in size and shape to a bat, they looked like miniature dragons. 4 pyrox had finished growing to the 3rd stage. 1 adult would be useful, so this harvest was larger than expected. An adult pyrox was an intermediate 4 LV creature. It was 1 level lower than Inferno but boasted the efficiency of 20,000 PT. 40 pyrox larvae cost 48,000 PT, while 4 adults would be 30,000 PT each. Good work. I praised their performance. Julium and the dwarf chief Stein fell to their knees. It is natural. Dungeon Master. What do you want? If it is appropriate, then I will give it to you. Julium looked around nervously before saying, Is Yi here? She went to gather honey. Then, can you change the garden? The garden? Julium cried out with a desperate expression. The large structure with the bizarre shape that is on our floor. The fairy told me it is a garden, but as an elf, it is indescribable. Yi professed to Julium that she had made a great garden. She seemed to be talking about the shit-shaped structure. The dark elf's sense of aesthetic received a shock from the structure. I lightly nodded. I'll allow it. Thank you. What do the dwarves want? I looked in the direction of the dwarves. The chief Stein's eyes lit up. Dungeon Master, I've found some unusual minerals all over the dungeon. Will you allow me to dig it up and refine it? I will also allow this. However, half the things created will be sent to me. I'll remember that, Dungeon Master. The dwarves were a species obsessed with making things. Unusual minerals were found in this dungeon. Half of them would be turned over to me. And I should give a separate floor for the dwarves. I looked at the excited faces of the dwarves. They had a lot of work to do, so I should assign them a floor. Sooner or later, the awakened will pass the 4th floor in order to reach the 5th floor. After that, they will taste the frustration of the lava-filled 6th floor and their stamina will be consumed. I was locked in thought. The 5th and 6th floors would trouble the awakened. Then it was necessary to adjust the pace on the 7th floor. Repair their weapons and recover their stamina. A type of safe zone? Normal demons absolutely won't allow this. But I was walking on a totally different route. To some extent, understanding humans was a favorite game in my previous life. Because of this, I know how to utilize their focus. This flexibility only existed for me. Gaining information from the awakened in exchange for them killing the creatures. It is very tedious to collect things one by one. Chrisley will also find making undead easier. Making undead could quickly increase the undead manufacturing skill. Anyway, the magic power inside the creatures would just return to the dungeon or be eaten by other creatures. It would be very tedious. So it was a good idea to leave this with the human awakened. I spoke after organizing my thoughts. Listen, dwarves. The dwarves turned to look at him. We are listening. I will give you a place to stay on the 7th floor. But your role is to help the awakened, not stop them. The dwarf chief Stein said in a terrible tone. We don't understand your words, Dungeon Master. The dwarves will live on the 7th floor for the convenience of the human awakened. They will be tired and weary at first, but after you're welcome, they will soon ask for information. Tell them what you know. In addition, repair their equipment and obtain the dead bodies of the creatures. Those are the 2 tasks required of you. I had to be careful with the information posted on the internet. I couldn't write down everything, so the role of the dwarves was very important. It wasn't enough to get their bodies. I was always seeking more efficiency. Bring the corpses obtained to Chrisley. However, report to Yi the information that you shared with the awakened. Aside from that, you don't have to care about the awakened. The humans are suspicious people. What if they attack first? The current humans have very low levels. And their numbers will be reduced before reaching the 7th floor filled with dwarves. Their numbers won't be enough to threaten you. We will follow your words. Losing some dwarves wouldn't give me a lot of damage. One of them cost 5,500 points, so there was no reason I couldn't increase their numbers by 100. After the performance report, I looked at the 4 pyrox again. They were floating on the lava while looking at me. Their instincts meant they naturally gravitated to the Dungeon Master. But it was clear that someone had been gentle with them. Who has trained the Pyrox? Julium replied. Chrisley, Dungeon Master. I knew it. I could guess who had a hand in raising the Pyrox. Ever since Chrisley underwent the ritual, she had never betrayed my expectations. I nodded my head. Chrisley, come forward. Chrisley, who was sitting in the middle of the Dark Elves, came forward. Apart from Yihi, she was the only one allowed so close to me. I was glad to see the adult Pyrox, but Chrisley's overwhelming growth was more satisfying. Especially after she turned a great number of humans into zombies. Thanks to that, it was possible to fill the vacant spots left by the monster wave. In this current situation, Chrisley was the most useful one. I studied her face and said, Chrisley, from now on, you will find special places in the dungeon with the Pyrox. Is it possible to navigate to places with strong magic power? It is possible, Chrisley answered confidently. I nodded. Okay, lead the Pyrox and look for a place with strong fire magic. Don't forget to report it to me first before entering. I will keep that in mind, my dungeon master. 3 days later, Chrisley came looking for me. I found 3 places with powerful fire magic. I was expecting it to take a week, so I was surprised at the quick turnaround. No matter how quick the feet of the Dark Elves, 3 days was quite short for the Pyrox to search. They must have wandered the dungeon without sleeping. I spoke with a satisfied smile. Let's go together. Guide me to the place with the most intense magic power. Chrisley laughed, revealing a dimple. I will gladly do so. My dungeon master. In the meantime, she had started adding my to dungeon master. Was it due to the ceremony? Somehow it felt like my ears were ringing. The dungeon's 29th floor. The Pyrox that had been acting like hyperactive dogs suddenly stopped in front of one wall. There's something there. I had 90 magic power. I was able to sense the wavelengths of magic power flowing around to a certain extent. I placed my hand on the wall and noticed a portion that was thinner. I gathered power in my hands and immediately struck it down. Kwang. My superior strength and the power of the lightning god technique meant the dungeon wall didn't stand a chance. I repeated the action several times and soon the wall was completely demolished, revealing the other side. It was at that moment. Great achievement. One of the 4 altars that exist in the dungeon, the altar of fire, has been found. Once the altar collapses, magic power will start circulating around the dungeon. In addition, the barrier outside the dungeon protecting it will evaporate. -2 fire golems have been given as compensation. Beyond the walls were 2 enormous fire golems protecting the altar. I've found it. Advanced 3 LV creatures. This was compensation, and I was able to obtain 2 creatures that were worth 170,000 point. I should look for the other altars later. Previously I quickly lost my dungeon. I didn't know where the altars were. A demon in my previous life only found it by chance. Fire golems, Chrisley muttered. The Pyrox following her shrunk back in fear. The other creatures were in an entirely different class. Don't be scared. The fire golems won't move without my instructions. I understand. By the way, what is this place? The fire altar. It adjusts the flow of magic power through the dungeon. Anyway, I was the one who could get the fire golems working. I was about to leave when Chrisley opened her mouth. Letters are floating in the air. Do you see it? Letters? I looked around the altar and didn't see any letters. I never heard of such a thing, but Chrisley wouldn't be lying. I think the information is related to the dungeon. Read it. Chrisley carefully opened her mouth. This is the place of a fallen god. A place inside the dungeon. I am the god of wisdom, Minerva. Thy will. Thou who obtained my wisdom, I will give you one last gift. My expression changed the moment I heard Chrisley's words. Minerva. It was the name of one of the gods who played a decisive role in my return. I had made a deal with them at the end in order to return. So why was that name here? In addition, I couldn't see the letters. The phrases were only visible to Chrisley. Maybe it is because Chrisley's intelligence reached 100. It was just a guess. And at that moment, a crack appeared over the altar. The crack was infused with chaotic magic power and divine power. A giant creature was revealed through the crack. Karuk. It had an eagle's head, but the size was no comparison. A creature completely different from the fire golems. Griffin. Chrisley was shocked. One of the finest lightning creatures, a griffin. It was a high-class creature, and the difference between medium and advanced creatures was like the difference between heaven and earth. Ha! I looked at the griffin sitting on the floor. It had a noble presence that made even the fire golems look small. I opened up Mind's Eye to check the status of the griffin. Name: Griffin. Stats: Strength 88, Intelligence 77, Agility 69, Stamina 84, Magic Power 85, Potential 403 405. Uniqueness: a pet raised by the goddess of wisdom Minerva. But as a last favor after her death, it recognizes Randolph Briggseel as its new owner. Skill: Fire and Lightning, Epic. A high-class creature with stats beyond 400. It was similar to my level when I had Wrath, my titles and all the special options. But unlike me, the griffin was optimized for attacks. If a griffin appeared right now, then it would be a disaster. Right now, there were no demons with high-class creatures. High-class creatures could only be obtained from the Demon World auction or special events. Are there more in other dungeons? This was the last present from Minerva. Yet there were 3 more altars that might have something there. But what about the other dungeons? The place of the fallen gods. I had an agreement with the fallen gods. If the other dungeons contained the places of fallen gods, then there might be gifts left for me in those dungeons. I have to change my plans a little bit. I got an unexpected harvest. The high-class griffin meant it wasn't necessary to cause a monster wave. An overwhelming power that would dominate humans. The purpose of the monster wave was to quickly increase the growth of the awakened. They would grow and remain vigilant. Now I could use the griffin and Chrysley. If I used them and the advanced fire golems to produce a monster wave. The gods. I will accept their gifts. I formed a strong fist. Originally I planned to raise the awakened and preserve the creatures in my dungeon before hitting the dungeons of other demons. That idea was still unchanged. But there was a chance to obtain similar gifts from other demons, so I should probably check the dungeons near me. I started looking for the most vulnerable dungeons in the neighboring countries. Where were the nearest dungeons to Korea, China and Japan? In particular, there were 5 dungeons in China. But China was huge, so it wasn't particularly geographically close. I would rather cross the sea towards Japan. The dungeon in Japan is under the rule of Grand Duke Upa's faction. The name, Adol? I pondered over it. I needed to choose the dungeon carefully. I would be passing through an area under the supervision of Grand Duke Upa. He had one of the biggest forces, but I didn't care for Upa. In the latter half of the war, demons started acting selfishly in order to get their hands on points and dungeons. If a demon killed another one, then they could take over the dungeon and absorb the remaining points. The intact points in the dungeon could be obtained as profit. This information was only revealed after 5 years due to the brutality of Grand Dukes Upa and Ariel. Of course, it went without saying that the process involved a fierce struggle. The remaining 2 Grand Dukes, Pandemonium and Okulos, embraced strategy over plain destruction. Anyway, the situation right now was the most important. It was highly likely that Earl Adol from Upa's faction was in Japan. Grand Duke Upa would give most of his attention to the dukes under his command. I have to kill Earl Adol. My goal was set. If I increase my dungeons, then I can clear the Demon World auction in a minimum of 2 years. That was my original schedule, but it is okay. Obtaining advanced creatures from the altar would give me a definite advantage. The demons that didn't have the points to participate in the auction would strengthen their dungeons instead. On the other hand, some might have delayed strengthening their dungeon to save points for the auction. The damage caused by killing Adol would be tremendous. Although I had advanced creatures, Krasla and Chrysley, the losses caused by taking over a new dungeon might take years to repair. But it was a different story now that I had the high-class griffin. The griffin was specialized in attack and Adol's dungeon would be powerless in front of it. The first dungeon that I explored in my previous life. The distance was close, so after losing my dungeon, I headed to Japan first. I quickly passed through the dungeon. Certainly, I remember he was a very disgusting bastard. Normal demons under Grand Duke Upa were rare. It was also true for Adol. He had a hobby of playing with the orcs, kobolds and gnolls. It seemed to excite him to make the orcs wear sexy underwear. The creatures didn't understand and gave birth to mutated children. Their minds were twisted and they became filled with lust and envy. I frowned as I recalled it. A demon I didn't want to deal with. It was Earl Adol. His dungeon contains a lot of creatures, especially orcs. A griffin is their natural enemy. Memories of my previous life were evoked. If I could obtain more advanced creatures from the dungeon, then I could use them to push against Adol's dungeon. Japan was a bit far across the sea, but the idea remained inside my head. Anyway, that is for one day in the future. My plan had changed, but my ultimate goal was still the same. I began to prepare to strike Adol's dungeon with excited eyes. Fire, ice, earth and wind golems. In a little more than 2 months, I was able to find 2 golems of every attribute. In addition, I collected 250,000 more points during that time and had approximately 410,000 points. Therefore I bought the 2LV advanced creature, Turtle Island, without worrying. It was smaller on the ground but would grow to the size of a small island once in the water. The size and defense made spending 110,000 worth it. But I didn't just want to move the creatures. I decided to use the remaining 300,000 points on a Lich. The Lich was an advanced 4LV creature, so it would match well with the Griffin. Lich. The skills it can use are quite unconventional. The Lich's power increased with more corpses. It could explode or move the dead bodies. In addition, many of the creatures had minor skills that were useful. So I finished the configuration. The list of creatures that would hit Adol's dungeon were as followed. Krasla and Chrisley, 40 Dark Elves, 4 Pyrox, 2 advanced golems from the 4 attributes, for a total of 8. 1 Lich, 1 Griffin. The dwarves were busy creating their village on the 7th floor. Turtle Island was purely a means of transportation. Anyway, they would be a great help when targeting the dungeon. An elite and organized group would be striking the dungeon. The power was enough to destroy half of South Korea. My expectations would be lower without the Griffin, but I nodded lightly at the configuration of the creatures. Kung. First, the 8 golems escaped from the dungeon. Huge figures over 10 meters. The fire golem caused flames to roar while the ice golem froze the greenery. The earth golem gathered earth together to form special soil while wind blasted around the wind golem's body. They were followed by 4 Pyrox who looked like miniature dragons with bat wings, 40 Dark Elves and Krasla who was riding Inferno. Finally, the soldiers observed Chrisley riding on top of the enormous Griffin. This was a completely different scale from the crude first monster wave. Everyone's instincts clamored not to get near. Should we attack? The chain of command couldn't respond to the soldiers' question. What should they do? Of course, if they fought, then there would be a counterattack. After the first monster wave, tight defenses were formed around the dungeon. They hadn't expected that the creatures to emerge would be beyond their imagination. At that moment, someone suddenly shouted, "El Lich." I heard that a Lich wiped out hundreds of thousands of soldiers and some awakened in France. I saw a video of it. What, Lich? Crazy? Wasn't the monster wave in France called Nightmare Day? I heard tactical nuclear strikes were required. The soldiers started buzzing. Everyone present was terrified at the existence of the Lich. The monster wave that took place in France. There was the appearance of a Lich. In the case of France, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and awakened died. They were able to handle other creatures, but the Lich caused a huge headache. The Lich's body was immune to any attack skills. In the end, tactical nuclear strikes were used to deal with it. Should we attack? Wait, I'm still thinking. A decision couldn't be easily made. It was difficult to attack, but they couldn't allow the creatures to enter the city. The damage would be incomparable to the first monster wave. It couldn't be allowed to happen. There was no choice in the first place. Damn. Get ready. Ready. The tanks aimed at the creatures heading away from the dungeon. Send a request for support. We just need to buy some time. All eyes turned to the west. The troops gathered here had stopped the first monster wave, but they honestly admitted that they couldn't defeat the Lich. However, it was enough if they could buy some time. This was an operation mobilized by the United States Forces Korea, USFK. They just needed to buy time for the support from the USFK. Kwang. KWA Kwang. Soon all the firepower was concentrated on the creatures. Poor humans. But Chrisley, who was playing the role of general, didn't care. These crude attacks couldn't hurt the advanced creatures. Chrisley lightly slapped the Griffin. And the Griffin turned its head. It sucked in everything around it as it took a deep breath. Walk. The epic grade skill, Fire and Lightning. A wide area breath skill emerged from the mouth of the Griffin. At the same time, the fire and lightning evaporated everything it touched, including the tanks. The sight after the skill ended was even more disturbing. A decimated field. The surviving soldiers flopped to the ground. Their fellow soldiers had disappeared without a trace. The only thing left were some lower bodies on the ground. It was like a natural disaster. This was the grandeur of the high-class creature, the Griffin. One attack was enough to make them at a loss. The government in Seoul declared an emergency. The area was urgently evacuated as dozens of jet fights flew in the sky. Numerous tanks and armored vehicles also moved in the region. Some news helicopters risked their lives to broadcast the scene, but eventually the words, "Doomsday," was caught in their mouths. The creatures are flocking. The brave soldiers of South Korea are fighting, but the creatures are too powerful. Is this the end of South Korea? We don't know when the troops from the US will arrive to help. Please pray for the soldiers. Every person stopped working and carefully watched the TV screen. They could only sit and pray. The Griffin's lightning skill that evaporated everything and the overwhelming strength of the golems. The Dark Elves' maneuverability and the Pyrox fought against the fighter jets. The situation didn't look favorable at all. It was decided that the soldiers couldn't stop the advance of the creatures. The Awakened. The Awakened has appeared. A reporter relaying live from the helicopter cried out. The camera rolled quickly. The lens showed a series of people running towards the Awakened. They had finally come. I smiled. Hundreds of Awakened were around me. The eyes of all humans were focused on South Korea. There were magic items that could conceal the atrocities, but I didn't want to use them. A long-awaited S rank. I started to prepare as soon as I received it. All through false acting. Despite the plan changing, the result still ended up with the awareness of the Awakened increasing. I recruited Awakened and sold the name of Devil Hunters. Among them, there were some with low and moderate potential. Food. Yes, food. The initiation ceremony. A large amount of food gathered under the pretense of saving South Korea. They didn't realize they were just feeding themselves to the tiger. Humans acted as true heroes, but wasn't that just script that I wrote? Of course, I didn't include Yoo Eun-hye and Lee Ji-hye in this. I needed to fatten them up a little bit more before consuming them. In a word, rabble. The Awakened gathered here were unlikely to reach the limits of their potential. They were just lumps of points. At the same time, all the people seeing this were respecting them as true heroes. Defend South Korea. We are heroes. Heroes who don't fear death. The momentum of the Awakened were growing. They could only watch during the first monster wave, but now it was different. The strongest Awakened that would protect South Korea. Furthermore, the word hero existed in the status window. It heightened the ridiculous atmosphere. The battlefield was filled with the corpses of the soldiers, but the Awakened had faced numerous deaths in the dungeon. Kwakwang. The Lich used the skill, Corpse Explosion. Strong magic power washed over the corpses of the soldiers. Hundreds of corpses became zombies. Their physical abilities had weakened a lot, but the soldiers felt enormous pressure. The intelligent Awakened went after the necks of the zombies. The Guarders and Magicians also poured out their skills. Kuong. The body of the earth golem shook. The echo passed through the ground and caused an earthquake. Dozens died, but it didn't stop the Awakened. Charge. And finally, my turn came. A group composed of 100 people followed me. Do you see it? The appearance of the struggling heroes. There is still hope. The advance of the creatures has slowed. All media outlets were broadcasting it. The army stepped back while the Awakened went forward to block the monster wave. The eyes of millions of people were fixed on them. The real-time broadcast meant that people were cheering for the Awakened on the internet. The housewives doing housework forgot about as they watched the screen. Professionals at work looked at their phones while others drank in a bar and focused on the television. So terrible. The Lich is a vicious creature. Awakened. No, heroes. Have strength. Everyone is cheering for you. The battle situation still wasn't good. But it felt like things were gradually tilting to the side of the Awakened. Such hope burned in everyone's chest. Look at this. Hundreds of heroes are marching towards the larger creatures. The one leading them is the captain of the raid group Devil Hunters. Devil Hunters. That name was engraved in everyone's ears at that moment. Kuong. After a fierce competition, the earth golem fell. A golem has collapsed. The dying Awakened were revived by the news. Already more than half of the awakened had blood spilling on the ground. Now one of the earth golems had fallen. At that moment, all the awakened and people watching the scene screamed. If they knew the real truth. I smiled at such a reaction. Naturally, this was a screenplay that I wrote. The earth golem was lying on the floor, but it hadn't really reached the end of its strength. I was an absolute existence to the creatures in the dungeon. After some moderate attacks, it fell according to my command. There was no need to speak. I just needed to open up my magic power in order to convey my meaning. The earth golem succumbed to it, so the attacks stopped. The awakened who were fighting briefly hesitated. What's going on? The griffin is coming down. The awakened with observation skills discovered that griffin was the name of the creature. And the creature that caused fear in the sky was descending. Half of the damage had occurred due to the griffin. The griffin was more terrifying than 8 golems. Such an existence descending to the ground caused goosebumps to form. But the thing that caught their eyes was the person riding the griffin. A beautiful and dazzling sight. But somehow the woman gave off a cold impression. It was Chrisley. She landed in front of me and asked, "Great skills. What is your name?" It was unlike her usual tone. She was placed in an awkward position, but right now she was acting. Chrisley was performing my command with a cold expression. She wore a half-skull mask, but this one covered the left side of her face. There was a simple reason for this. I doubt the demons are watching, but I should be careful. The demons weren't interested in human civilization. And the demons felt the need to destroy humans. Their pride was very strong, so they isolated themselves. Something like human culture would never enter their eyes. Even if it was broadcasted on television, the demons wouldn't be interested enough to give it a single glance. My name might eventually leak to them, but they wouldn't move until they were confident. No, would they even make a move? It would undoubtedly take them a long time to confirm this. I was certain of this because I knew the nature of the demons. During that time, I had confidence that I could get ahead so that they wouldn't be able to touch me by the time they noticed. I looked Chrisley in the eye. There is no need to know that. Hoo-hoo, you really have courage, but I don't love people like that. Humans like you are stupid for stepping into the dungeon owned by me. Someone like you is called an awakened? The translation magic and voice amplification spell meant that Chrisley's words were clearly heard. Everyone panicked at her remark. Dungeon Master. 72 dungeons had simultaneously appeared in the world. Many investigations were being made, but almost none of the mysteries had been revealed. This was the first time an owner had been revealed. Chrisley turned her head. Listen, humans. She was calm and dignified. Her intelligence was 100 and her magic power was also very high. A beauty and poise that couldn't be shaken by anyone. Not long ago, I became aware that humans had entered my dungeon. Those dirty feet dared enter my dungeon without permission, so I gave them direct punishment. Her tone and nature seemed to slightly mimic the Grand Duke Ariel. Grand Duke Ariel was a cold demon, and this was quite effective on the humans. The people who heard her words were resentful. If that was true, then the first monster wave wouldn't have happened. However, Chrisley just continued without caring. But that wasn't enough. You really don't know anything. It won't be difficult for me to get rid of this country. You saw that just now. Her words had power. People had seen the overwhelming combat strength of the creatures. If she called out all her creatures. Just imagining it was horrible. Humans, I am speaking to the awakened. I am the king of the dungeon and your destiny is to kill me. Just like you killed the mighty earth golem in front of me. Chrisley's eyes became more intense. I am a dungeon master. I like a strong challenge. The ability for the heroes to grow is truly remarkable. Facing strong people gives me great happiness. Continue to grow stronger in the future. But I can't stand for weak and ordinary humans to step foot in my dungeon. Kung, Gurik. Her mood seemed to worsen. The tense people around her clenched their fists as they waited. After 30 seconds, Chrisley slowly opened her mouth. I will only permit the heroes to enter my dungeon. I firmly believe that one day they can become strong enough to challenge me. It was at that moment. One of the silent awakened suddenly shouted. Wait, then what is the monster wave? If you were intending to remain quiet, then why the monster wave? Chrisley replied with a flippant attitude. I'm not the master of the creatures in my dungeon. Not all the creatures are under my control. So if you heroes want to keep this country, your family and your friends, make further efforts to become stronger. The creatures beyond my control will gradually escape the dungeon. Suitable bait. The 7th floor dwarf village was accessible to humans, and the dungeon master was notifying them that not all creatures were under her control. Chrisley looked at me with curious eyes. Your eyes are filled with life. One hero. There are thousands of golems sleeping inside the dungeon that can level this country. This was a lie, something to create fear in the hearts of humans. There were only 8 advanced golems. If there were several thousand golems, then they really could smash the earth. Chrisley spoke with a lot of strength. Humans, heroes, reach me. On that day, I will tell the world the truth. The speech ended and the creatures started moving. But they weren't moving back to the dungeon. Chrisley gave off the impression, since I already came out, I might as well visit other dungeons, as she refused to return. In addition, her overbearing presence said, if someone makes the wrong move, then I will release the creatures sleeping in the dungeon. Everyone could only watch quietly as the parade passed by. Submission. It was a tacit declaration of defeat. The dungeon was an unknown place. There were bizarre creatures they had never experienced before. It might be able to resist other countries, but it was impossible to prepare measures against the dungeon. It wasn't possible to destroy the dungeon itself. Every firearm that entered the dungeon was neutralized. What should they do? The 21st century. Various countries would go to war for their own interests. But it was impossible to understand the dungeons and creatures. An overwhelming force that humans couldn't resist, so it could be considered a natural disaster. Natural disasters would cause great damage but would pass one day. But people didn't give up hope. Although the troops were defeated, the dungeon master directly mentioned it. The last card left for them was the heroes. The body of Turtle Island in the sea started to rapidly swell. It absorbed the water and quickly grew to the size of a small island. Soon the creatures boarded it. And I was also among them. We disappeared like smoke after reaching the east coast of South Korea. Just like Chrisley, I was wearing a skull mask that covered the right half of my face. It seemed like one mask that had been split in half. Dark black smoke rose around me like steam. This fog was caused by a creature called Shade, so that the humans wouldn't recognize me. But combined with the skull mask, it created a strange fear. It went better than expected. Chrisley, who was next to me, opened her mouth. The scenario went better than she expected. Initially she was awkward but assimilated over time. No one doubted that she was the dungeon master. Chrisley's cheeks turned red. It feels like putting on a costume. You should become familiar with it. I will remember that, my dungeon master. She replied without even turning her head. I had carefully explained human science to her. That's why Chrisley was comfortable. After my explanation, she eagerly used her brain. She was starting to take the initiative. From training the Pyrox to following the script, she showed complete obedience. Depart, I said after all the creatures had boarded Turtle Island. Soon the holes on Turtle Island released intense, compressed air to create a powerful shield of air. Turtle Island took advantage of this air shield for large-scale transport. It also acted as a strong form of defense. Turtle Island began to dive into the sea. The dungeon wave that took place in South Korea was broadcasted live around the world. The world had no idea where the creatures went after leaving the dungeon. The creatures were moving around so they couldn't relax. Everybody was lost for words at a report that a giant turtle dived into the waters of the East Coast. The creatures on board the turtle disappeared in one move. Destroyers and submarines urgently tried to search for them, but it was too late. And the giant turtle once again appeared at Kamakura City, Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan. It arrived at Sagami Bay in less than a day. Kamakura had no large buildings and was filled with many small houses huddled together. We'll walk from here. I had intended to advance to Tokyo immediately, but the water depth of Tokyo Bay was too low. I judged that it would be better to move slowly from here. Turtle Island once again dived back into the sea once all the creatures were off. I opened up my magic power to become familiar with the surroundings. Chrisley asked with confusion, "Where is this place?" "A country the humans called Japan. This place is going to become filled with turmoil." Chrisley laughed bittersweetly as she summarized the situation. "Sea creatures. Run. Those are creatures? Are they shooting a movie here?" The humans were greatly surprised and started fleeing. But there were many humans who didn't. At any rate, it was only a matter of time until Japan's self-defense forces arrived. I smiled coldly. "We can arrive in half a day." Nothing will stop us. In fact, it wouldn't even take half a day. All the creatures could arrive in Tokyo in a few hours. There was no reason to treat Japan differently from South Korea. This territory would be under my jurisdiction, so I needed to show an exceptional performance. Trample on all of them. At the same time, the 8 golems started moving heavily. There was an event nearby and people started running away as soon as they realized the situation. The golems were at least 8 meters high and they were taller than the surrounding buildings that were only 6 meters. They lightly smashed or stepped on the buildings. Ta-tang, ta-tang. The police received a tip, but they weren't very helpful. The crude pistols were only useful against creatures like the kobolds. The lowest level creatures were the vanguard, but the guns just tickled the medium and advanced creatures. It was impossible as the golems reached out and squeezed the police cars. I followed behind the huge golems, causing destruction. The dark elves and pyrox used their mobility while corpses were turned into zombies and joined their ranks. There were already over 300 zombies. A high value. The expensive creatures were quite worthy. The 4LV Advanced Lich cost 280,000 points, but it was worth it. The Griffin caused overwhelming destruction, but the Lich stimulated the primordial fear of humans. Just that alone made it easy to work. The Griffin flew low above the ground and Chrisley told me, "My dungeon master, the human soldiers aren't far away. Fairly fast. It had only been 30 minutes since I left Sagami Bay. The difference with South Korea was huge, so I admired their reaction speed. Prepare to meet them. The Griffin will suffice. I will follow your command." Chrisley bowed her head and lightly kicked the Griffin. The Griffin spread its wings and flew into the sky. Soon the fire and lightning skill could be seen as it melted the Japanese self-defense forces. Japan's dungeon was over a radius of 3 kilometers in Tokyo Park. The size of the dungeon was different from South Korea's dungeon, but the composition was similar. The size was always different from the outward appearance. This dungeon had 35 floors, but I remember that the structure was complex. "We've finally arrived." I clicked my tongue as I stood in front of the dungeon. Handling all the obstacles would be time-consuming. South Korea was my headquarters and this was the enemy's territory. Crushing the dungeon of Adol, who belonged to Grand Duke Upa's faction, would be a declaration of war. Of course, I wasn't really interested in Adol and Japan, it was just a formal work. Soon this area would be under my jurisdiction, so I needed to let them know fear. "Adol, I'm back." There were many differences between what I was seeing now and my previous life. At that time, I was the underdog who lost my dungeon. I had come to Japan thinking to make this dungeon mine. Of course, it was another loss. I had a severed arm and barely managed to run away. It required 8 potions to restore my severed arm. Just thinking about the humiliation made my body tremble. But, the dungeon looked very small to me now. Could Adol stop the current me? At that time, I was alone, but now I had many powerful creatures around me. Griffin, Lich, Dark Elves and Pyrox. I was much stronger than before. Please don't disappoint me. I slowly entered the dungeon. Unlike my dungeon, Adol didn't gradually increase the level of his creatures. He had no interest in the ecology and randomly placed it. The first thing I saw were the orc shamans. General Awakened wouldn't even think of entering the dungeon. It was followed by Null champions and arc goblins. Quite a number of them had been mutated. There were very few creatures naturally born with mutations in my dungeon. My heart was a little envious when looking at them, but only the strong would survive. The ecological balance would completely collapse. The foundation to raise the awakened would also be lost. A vicious cycle. This result was due to Adol's insensitivity. Similar to my previous life. A few floors were for breeding. But this type of configuration continued to be repeated. I was sure of it due to my experience. I will take the lead from here. I knew the inner configuration of the dungeon. I led the creatures through the dungeon maze. I mercilessly used wrath as I quickly navigated the dungeon. The dungeon's top floor. The demon Adol was in the middle of having sex with an orc when the fairy of the dungeon core approached. "Dungeon Master, someone is trying to invade." Adol's expression crumbled. "This lowlife bastard, I told you not to tell me when the someone is acting. I can feel some great magic power. There are 8 advanced golems and a griffin. Crazy bastard. A griffin is a high-class creature. There is no way to get one yet." It was dismissed as a ridiculous story. The fairy of the dungeon core shed tears. Really, another demon is invading. Guyo, you damn young bastard. This isn't the first time you've said such things. A fairy is really mischievous and conniving. The name of the fairy was Guyo. Just like many fairies, its playfulness made it cross a river of no return. Adol's fairy was very mischievous and full of lies. Even if the fairy had a spiritual body, Guyo didn't have a death wish. Adol was a deviant demon that copulated with orcs. Guyo was regularly cursed at by Adol. But now Gaia's expression was desperate. This was the one time Guyo wasn't lying. The high-class griffin and advanced creatures were rapidly rising through the dungeon. From the beginning, they never seemed to get lost at all. Right now Adol was just snorting incredulously. It was upsetting that Gaia's words weren't believed. The real thing, queek. Adol was immersed in his previous actions. Gaia's desperate words were covered up. How poor, I said reluctantly as I climbed the dungeon. Was this originally such a lousy place? In my previous life I had struggled in Adol's dungeon and now I was easily climbing it. The dungeon master was in charge of management and summoning the creatures. The dungeon master should be commanding the creatures from the top floor, but I couldn't sense his presence. It felt like they were just released freely. I lost one arm to something like this. A dungeon at this level? BB Udic. I gritted my teeth. Almost a year and a half ago. I used that time to actively rise. But judging by the state of the dungeon, this guy had no awareness. The other demons will start moving soon. Adol. This guy was so busy with sex that he forgot his duties to the dungeon. It was shameful for a dungeon to be treated like this, so luckily I was here to save it. Would it be able to stand for the next 10 years? In fact, Adol came to a bad end under the hands of the awakened. However, the growth of the awakened in Japan was a lot slower. Adol failed to properly manage his dungeon and everything in Japan was slowed. But it won't happen now that I came here. I would thoroughly change everything. My dungeon master. I have noticed many orc warriors. The griffin flew low. Chrisley spoke from above. Did the strong creatures instinctively gather on the upper floors? The level has risen slightly. This would also happen if a dungeon master didn't manage this place. They could freely leave this place. The more powerful creatures wanted to occupy the upper floors. That's because it was more stable to be near the magic power emitted by the dungeon core. That's why stronger creatures were assigned to the higher floors. I nodded and said, wipe them out. The 25th floor. There was a great number of advanced orc lords. The orc shamans, orc warriors and arc goblins were the best among the intermediate class creatures. On the other hand, I had 9 advanced and high-class creatures. A high-class creature could easily take care of the intermediate ranked ones. Quite a few ran away after detecting us. Those who stayed would have their blood spilled in vain. The scene of a dungeon master's dominance. Even if they died, the role of a creature was to prevent any intruders. They won't leave here alive. It was easy to take care of them. I was disappointed and appalled at how weak the enemy dungeon was. There aren't much points, but the creatures in the dungeon gave me a very small amount of points. At best, they were the standard of 20 minutes of work. It was still better than nothing. Queek. HELP. The orc warriors were rabble. There was no need to use the griffin. The dark elves were organized in a line while the creatures begged for their lives. But I already gave orders for their slaughter. The dark elves didn't spare those begging for their lives. I laughed quietly. Adol's creatures were a disappointing sight as I swept through the dungeon. By the way, I was puzzled. Adol, did he still not notice? Even if Adol hadn't noticed, the dungeon core fairy would have noticed it. There were no defenses, so it seemed like he really didn't know. It has to be. Anyway, I had no choice but to feel like Adol was dull as I approached the dungeon core. I had already come up a considerable way, so I would notice if troops were gathered. Chrisley, who subduing the creatures responded. She immediately descended with the griffin. What happened, my dungeon master? Hand me the voice amplification ring. Here it is, my dungeon master. She pulled off the ring from her finger and handed it respectfully to me on bent knees. Itchy. I shook my head as I wore the ring. I didn't know why, but hearing the words, my dungeon master, made my body itchy. Cover your ears. The cleanup had finished. Soon the dark elves, Krasla, Chrisley, the Pyrox, the Lich and the Golems blocked their ears. I opened up my magic power in order to dominate the creatures. I cleared my throat, and I shouted louder, Adol, Kurururu. Due to opening up my 90 magic power, my voice rang through the dungeon like lightning. Kurururu. The dungeon shook. Adol was forced to stop his activities with the orcs. What is this magic power? The intruder? Gaia's body trembled with anxiety. The intruders on the 25th floor were already approaching the 26th floor. There were only 10 floors left until the top floor. The intruders were coming without hesitation like they knew the way. Judging by the speed, there was half a day remaining. It was quite late to prepare. My dungeon? Who? A demon, along with his creatures. So all that nonsense before was true? That's right. Adol's expression became determined in an instant. This useless brat, why are you only saying this now? I tried to tell you. A baseless accusation. Guyo tried to say hundreds of times that the intruder was coming. Adol had just ignored Guyo and focused on sex. Adol spoke with a frown. Look up the exact configuration of the creatures that are invading. No, don't. The crystal ball that shows the entire dungeon. Bring it. The crystal ball was specially modified in order to view the whole situation inside the dungeon. Adol had spent 100,000 points on it, but it was worth it. A dungeon master couldn't know the details of those invading the dungeon without the crystal ball. Domestic mode didn't show the people invading. Otherwise he was forced to borrow the power of the fairy, but Guyo kept lying to him. Therefore, Adol had to purchase the crystal ball and modified it. Guyo whined while carrying a huge crystal ball. Soon Adol confirmed the magic power by injecting magic power into it. This guy? Who is it? Somehow he looks familiar. A skull-masked man and woman. A dark elf in front wielding a red spear. Adol thought for a moment before clapping. Oh, that guy. Demon World Auction. Krasla and Chrisley were sold there. And the one who bought those two, Randolph Brigzeal. A demon that the faction of Grand Duke Upa hated. He couldn't forget. It is too bad I don't have a means to contact Upa Nim. Grand Duke Upa only gave that to the dukes that followed him. Of course he didn't know Earl Adol. He also didn't have a way to link to other demons. In the end, he had to handle the intruders himself. Huh? Is that really the high-class griffin? 8 advanced golems and a lich as well? Dragon cake was raked up over there. Great. What? But now wasn't the time for admiration. The creatures were coming to the top floor where the dungeon core was. Guyo was anxious, but Adol just snorted. Bah. It doesn't matter if he has some advanced creatures. No matter how superior the high-class creature, we have the numbers advantage. It is impossible for them to win. High-class creatures were extremely rare in the demon world. There was little chance to meet them, but among the high-class creatures, the griffin was on the low level. Adol believed that his higher number of advanced creatures could deal with it. Adol stared at the crystal ball. Randolph Brigzeal. Upa Nim will look at me differently if I catch him. Due to that guy, Grand Duke Upa had suffered ridicule from the other Grand Dukes. Upa wouldn't forget something like that. Adol's prestige would climb if he handed over Randolph Brigzeal's head. Guyo, bring the advanced creature Ornish. Oh Ornish, isn't it still unstable? It will be hard to control. I will direct it personally. As the dungeon master, it won't be able to resist my magic power. Now Guyo was convinced. The dungeon master's commands were absolute. He could control Ornish directly. Adol gave a strange laugh. There might be a high-class creature, but I have a hidden card. Randolph Brigzeal, I will make you regret coming to my dungeon. Unlike Randolph Brigzeal, he didn't use any points at the auction. He used the collected points and special mutation skill to create Ornish. A powerhouse comparable to a 5LV advanced creature. The result of a year of hard work. Ornish would be a match against the griffin. He started moving. I smirked after noticing that the behavior of the dungeon started changing. This behavior meant that the dungeon master Adol finally noticed. I happily increased the marching speed. I was looking forward to the reunion with Adol. It would be disappointing if I came up here without facing a satisfying opponent. Just imagining his power caused a smile to form. And once I reached the 30th floor, I met Adol, who was accompanied by countless creatures. Who is this? Are you Randolph Brigzeal? It was like meeting a friend after not seeing them for hundreds of years. I looked around at all the advanced creatures in the surroundings. 6 advanced 2LV orc lords, 2 advanced 3LV giant trolls. Behind them were thousands of orcs and trolls. Indeed, a formidable power. I shrugged. You remembered. A demon would be very stupid if they forgot. Have you come to swear allegiance to Grand Duke Upa Nim? Or a special pledge to me? No. I know that you can't contact Upa. This was Grand Duke Upa's nature. At most, he would only have Adol tell him where his dungeon was. Adol's face changed at my words. Who? Are you that anxious to die? Or are you confident because of the griffin? The griffin was flying in the air. The griffin was designed for attack. No matter how advanced the creature, it wouldn't be able to endure such large numbers. Is now the time to be talking? Don't worry, but before entering into battle, I will introduce you to my son Ornish. An odd-shaped creature emerged from among the trolls and orcs. That type of appearance, I couldn't describe it. The size was 2 meters. Broad shoulders like a troll, and the face was as ferocious as an orc. There was a long horn on its forehead and the wings were like a giant gargoyle. I had never seen a creature like this. I opened up mind's eye. Name: Adol Loof. Occupation: Demon Earl. Dungeon Master. Title: Abnormal sexual tastes. Intelligence +6. Stats: Strength 69, Intelligence 68, +7. Agility 68, Stamina 61. Magic Power 70. Potential: 336 +7 500ths. Uniqueness: none. Skill: Life Combination, U. Body Manipulation, U. Relative Comparison: Adol Loof. Strength 69, Intelligence 75, Agility 68, Stamina 61, Magic 70. Potential: 336 +7 500ths. Randolph Brigzeal. Strength 88, Intelligence 66, Agility 76, Stamina 82, Magic 90. Potential: 379 +23 500ths. Name: Ornish. Stats: Strength 85, Intelligence 51. Agility 78, Stamina 86. Magic Power 75. Potential: 375 391sts. Uniqueness: an organism created by Adol Loof. The skin and tendons of a giant troll, the heart of an orc lord, the wings of a gargoyle and the horn of a unicorn were ingredients used. Skill: Instant Regeneration, XU. Relative Comparison: Ornish. Strength 85, Intelligence 51, Agility 78, Stamina 86, Magic 75. Potential: 375 391sts. Randolph Brigzeal. Strength 88, Intelligence 66, Agility 76, Stamina 82, Magic 90. Potential: 379 +23 500ths. Life Combination? In other words, it was a skill to create mutations. But its abilities were equal to a 5LV advanced creature. A level that wouldn't be sold in the stores. It was understandable when looking at the ingredients. He must have used a minimum of 700,000 points. The 700,000 points weren't worth it when considering the attack stats. It could grow a little bit more, but 700,000 points could buy something more useful at the auction. It also only had one skill: Instant Regeneration. It would be useless in large-scale wars. There are 8 advanced creatures. 2 LV advanced orc lords, 3 LV advanced giant trolls, and Ornish made up the main forces. If I invested in the Demon World auction and the Awakened, then it would take me 3 to 4 years to reach this stage. But obtaining the 8 golems and the griffin had dramatically reduced my time frame. Isn't it dignified? Adol's face was filled with confidence. Pasik. A sound was heard. I laughed and raised wrath. And then said, "Sweep them all up, Kawang." The 8 golems headed towards the orcs. The orc lords pushed with their giant axes but couldn't stop them. The orcs had a high reproduction rate, but the orc lords were no match for the golems. Charring. Walk. Lightning poured from the mouth of the griffin. Hundreds of orcs evaporated. What are you doing? Stop the golem. Make sure the griffin falls. Adol was frustrated. Shortly after the battle started, his creatures were being overwhelmed. Numbers aren't everything. Sometimes too many numbers could get in the way. The large number of orcs were just food for the griffin as they were destroyed. Orc lords? Advanced grade 2 LV. The lich and golems had a higher rating. The lich and golems were very strong in power. There were only 2 giant trolls. The remaining mob could be entrusted to the griffin. This was a strategy I planned as soon as I obtained the griffin. Adol grinded his teeth together. Ornish, kill the griffin. Don't let that damn bird fly in front of me. Kaweek. Ornish dripped saliva as it started moving. I was about to use wrath on Ornish when Krasla came up to me. Dungeon Master, give me the chance to deal with that guy. I hesitated for a moment before saying, Krasla, you want to take on that orc variant? Krasla bowed his head even deeper. That's correct. It is only an orc variant, so there is no need for Dungeon Master to make a move. Krasla definitely wanted to be pitted against Ornish. The stats weren't very different, but Ornish appeared insane. The odds were in Krasla's favor if he used his skills. I'll allow it. I will definitely bring you victory. Chiok. Krasla ran with his spear. Ornish, who was rushing towards the griffin, was forced to stop as Krasla intercepted it. Now, if not Ornish, then there was only one opponent left. Adol. Ornish certainly wasn't worthy to fight me. The kings should fight among themselves. I should at least fight a dungeon master. I moved around the dark elves. I walked without stopping until I arrived in front of Adol. We seemed to be the only ones left. This. Adol's face was flushed. There was no choice. The griffin was wreaking havoc among his creatures. An earl was lacking compared to a duke or grand duke. I kicked the ground. Wrath moved vertically and struck his shoulder. Kakik. It happened in an instant. Adol stared at his torn left arm with disbelief. There was a difference of 60 stats between them. Besides, I had crossed the junction. That was 400 points, so Adol couldn't resist. I leisurely placed Wrath on my shoulder and said, Do you know why Adol was sent from the Demon World auction? What? Adol, who was in pain, stared at me. I shrugged. His ego is strong, so shouldn't I pay back his kindness? Isn't it good that the spirits intervened? Don't talk nonsense. Duke Pacan Grioli and Grand Duke Upa stood in front of me. And then he realized that they wouldn't be able to stop me. Adol's expression distorted. Bullshit. Grand Duke Upa Nim afraid of someone like you? You've only given me one wound. That blind, rotting faith. But I didn't pay attention to it. The other 3 Grand Dukes were watching. Pacan and Upa fell in favor. A Grand Duke and his faction were forcefully removed. So I can take care of Upa in the future. He won't be able to beat me. The 4 Grand Dukes. The demons had infinite faith in the Grand Dukes. But that way of thinking was wrong. It wasn't easy to change Adol's opinion towards Upa. Therefore I didn't bother. Adol wouldn't be logical involving this matter. Upa's followers didn't care even if he was a sadistic bastard. This isn't a lie. A thin smile. In addition, there was no benefit in being under Upa's employ. I was the critical factor involved in making Upa lose some privileges. Thanks to Dubelong's help, he wasn't able to return to the Demon World auction. And it was like a declaration of war to Grand Duke Upa. I declared, I will start with you. I'll cut Upa's limbs off one by one as I move up from below. He is too much of a nuisance to let it go. I will tear out your mouth. Adol's body started to transform. His muscles became bigger. The body manipulation, skill. But my eyes were still cold as I watched him. How foolish. I raised Wrath again. This was just a provocation. In the end, Adol was just a great disappointment. Incredible achievement. A demon has been slayed for the first time. 2 million PT will be paid. Adol's throat was cut. A message window rose up stating that 2 million PT were paid. In 1 year and a half, I had earned approximately 2.5 million points. But killing Adol gave me 2 million points all at once. This was a huge first achievement, but it meant the demons weren't fighting each other yet. In addition, it was likely that a party of human awakened had previously gained the achievement first. The awakened grew steadily until they could match the capabilities of the demons. Eventually there were 1 or 2 parties of awakened that could defeat the dungeons. Among the dead were demons. Kiek. I turned my head towards the sound. Ornish started to glow after its master died. It instinctively moved to perform the last command that Adol left behind. But it couldn't use its regeneration ability, so the assault was just suicide. Soon Krasla's red spear sliced off Ornish's head. The thousands of orcs were killed by the griffin, while the giant trolls and orc lords were defeated by the golems. Of course, there was some damage. 9 dark elves and 3 golems were lost. Not bad. I nodded. It was less damage than I thought. There was also the reward from the achievement. The results were beyond my expectations. The dungeon's top floor. I stood in front of the dungeon core fairy that was trembling with fright. "What is your name?" "G. Guyo." "Guyo?" Guyo seemed to attach Guyo to the end of his speech. A fairy's name was usually something like this. I said confidently, "Guyo, you are dependent on me. Your previous master Adol was a very poor guy. He had a 0 chance of becoming the devil. But as you have seen, I am different." Gaia's expression changed at my words. Guyo had been worrying about this for a long time. Gulp. Guyo swallowed hard. The fairies made a bargain with the devil to help the demons in order to become the fairy king. If their demon died, then the fairy had 2 choices. First of all, the fairy had no concept of death. But without the dungeon core, there was no energy. If a fairy lost the energy of the dungeon core, then it would have to start from scratch again. This time could take billions of years. So the first choice, start again with a new core. Second, accept a new master. However, a new contract with shackles needed to be formed. Sometimes the shackles were so powerful that it could lead to their destruction. The penalty of losing the contract would significantly increase. The following opportunities would be destroyed. Starting from scratch could mean eternal annihilation. It is an entirely different concept of death. An extreme fear that only the fairies would feel. So, a fairy had to choose carefully. Their new master must be someone with a chance to become the devil. It wouldn't be able to accept a third demon. The energy of a fairy's soul was used to form the contract, and there wasn't enough for a third chance. Guyo looked up at the man. At the same time, he remembered the battle. He had overcome the difference in numbers, Ornish and the dungeon master. He already owned a high-class griffin, so Guyo felt dizzy at the thought. At the very least, Guyo never sensed anything like this from Adol. Adol was very angry after the discovery of the intruders. He had a very hostile attitude after hearing the name Grand Duke Upa. The man said he overcome the powerful faction. The man seemed very confident. He had no hesitation to use his power. Growing up, he might really become the devil. Guyo slowly opened his mouth. I was still waiting. I knew the importance of this selection, so I remained silent. After several minutes passed, Guyo opened his mouth. Guyo won't be mistreated, as long as you faithfully fulfill your duties. Then, please let me meet the other fairy. Then I will decide. Guyo seemed to have already made a decision in his heart. That won't be difficult. Fortunately, this requirement was simple. I accepted and recalled an image of Yihi. Thanks to the fairy's blessing, I could connect and have a conversation with her. Yihi, who is it? A fast response. I verified that the connection was working and said, "Can you manifest where I am?" "Ah, master." Yihi thought that I was having a psychotic break. I suddenly heard a voice inside me. I'm really glad it wasn't like that. It can't be helped. This is the first time master spoke to me inside my head. It is natural that Yihi was confused. By the way, isn't that the dungeon in Japan? It is regrettable that Yihi can't help you in that dungeon. Ah, that's right. What is the result? Yihi was so curious that I've been teasing the bees. Of course, I have no doubt that master will win. I broke the connection. I nodded towards Guyo. Loosen the wards. Ah, why, you have received a blessing. The fairy scent on your lips. Oh my god. Gaia's eyes became as large as a lantern. And Gaia's wings flapped excitedly. Then it is okay. I accept. You are a friend of the fairies. I will believe you. The attitude changed by 180 degrees. It seemed like the blessing of a fairy was an important thing. It was solved simply. Guyo started flying in the air. The wings of the fairy sprayed powder in the air that formed letters. What is thy name? Randolph Brigzeal. Intense light poured from the letters. Guyo spoke with a serious expression. Does Randolph Brigzeal agree to be the fairy Gaia's new master? That's right. As the master of a dungeon, will you do your best to become the devil? Of course. The contract has been completed. Devil bless this fairy. The end? It was the first time I had obtained a lost dungeon. The contract was much simpler than I thought. I was slightly bewildered. Pock. There was an enormous surge of magic power from the dungeon core. And, a unique achievement, the first occupation of a dungeon was successful. The title, First to Occupy a Dungeon, has been given. The title of First to Occupy a Dungeon has transformed into Dungeon Hunter. Congratulations, Dungeon Hunter. is a special title given to the one who achieved two conditions at the same time, being the first to hunt a demon and the first to occupy a dungeon. Hunt more demons. There are many more dungeons to occupy. Challenge an incomprehensible area. There is no way to know what is at the end. The title was changed. I was puzzled and checked my status window. Name: Randolph Briggseel. Occupation: Demon Earl. Dungeon Master. Title: Dungeon Hunter. Residual stats +1 when occupying dungeons and hunting demons. Asterisk: Indomitable Warrior. XU. All stats +2. Asterisk: First to receive a fairy's blessing. U. Magic +6. Stats: Strength 79, +9, Intelligence 64, +2. Agility 74, +2, Stamina 80, +2. Magic Power 82, +8. Potential: 379 +23 500ths. Remaining stat points: 3. Electric Power, 4 gigawatts. Uniqueness: Heart of the Hell Monarch has been transplanted, full strength hasn't been fully opened. Changes have occurred in the Lightning God technique since swallowing a huge amount of magic power. The results are unpredictable. Skill combination: R, Mind's Eye, XU, Lightning God technique, Wrath, Epic. Rating: None. This was a title? The rating itself couldn't be seen, but the description meant there was a chance to obtain 140 stats. 70 dungeons, 70 demons. It was virtually impossible to handle all of them by myself, but my expectations were high. Residual stats could be used to break through the limits. If I reached my maximum potential of 500, then the residual stats could be used to break through the limit. I could sense the difference after having one of my stats break through to 90. I couldn't imagine the difference once it reached 100. After reaching 100, it was also possible to rise to 110 and 120. Maybe even more than that. Crazy. It was indeed a crazy title. And the title fit me perfectly. I was walking alone. I would feed on the demons and their dungeons to reach the top. Hunting them would make me stronger and increase my stats more than some titles. The status window showed my remaining points. I received 1 stat point from the Easter egg at the Demon World auction. And this time I gained 2 for a total of 3 extra stat points. Haha. A bright mood. To be honest, I couldn't remember any useless title in my previous life. However, hunting and conquering more dungeons would increase the territory I needed to protect. It was like a double-edged sword, but the title of Dungeon Hunter could make it a legendary treasure. It isn't over yet. The smile lasted for a long time. Adol was killed and I obtained his dungeon. Now was the time to look for additional benefits in the dungeon. Guyo. How many points did Adol have? Guyo hesitantly said, 4,500 points. My smile was erased in an instant. It was fortunate that I obtained 2 million points for being the first to hunt a demon. Adol had clearly used a lot of points to make Ornish. I decided to invest 500,000 points in the Japan dungeon. This had to be done first. I used domestic mode to check the status of the dungeon. The creatures were mixed together, so it would take a long time to divide them. At any rate, the breeding situation of the creatures wasn't bad. 40,000 goblins, 10,000 kobolds, 10,000 gnolls, orc shamans. What happened with the arc goblins? There are too many of them. Did Adol summon them? The arc goblin was an intermediate 2LV creature. It was similar to the common goblins but had much higher strength and agility. It was a tyrant known as the Little Predator that ate all life around them. There were 48 arc goblins. That number almost reached 50. Speaking of which, I could occasionally see arc goblins wandering the top floor. Adol liked orcs, so it was surprising to see any goblins. Guyo shook his head at my question. No, the arc goblins were a natural occurrence. There should be a limit to the mutation. That is ridiculous. I don't know. Guyo was grouchy. I started thinking, is this specific to the dungeon? The wavelength of magic varied between dungeons. The creatures would adapt differently. It was very rare, but sometimes demons could find that specificity to use it. This was probably why the goblins multiplied. The wavelength of magic in this dungeon is a good match for the goblins. They can reproduce depending on the climate, flora or fauna. This was worth experimenting with. Guyo. Other than the goblins, push all the creatures in one place. Under the dungeon master's command, it was possible for the fairy to supervise the creatures. It was hard with the orcs and trolls who had low intelligence. Of course, there was still a method with the creatures with low intelligence. If a kobold or goblin boss was summoned, then control would be easy. It was necessary to spend a little bit of time on separating the creatures. I understand. This is the first task you gave me, so I will work hard, Guyo said while flapping his wings. The wounds from Adol were very large. He doesn't say his name. This was different from Yihi. Was this the difference between self-esteem? The physiology of a fairy differed between individuals. His jaw tightened. An arc goblin will reproduce for survival. I should try some different experiments. I had returned, but I didn't know everything. In particular, I was ignorant about anything related to dungeons. But I was determined to take on this challenge. I would be directly involved in the ecological improvement of the dungeon. It felt like I was a god. Perhaps this was meant to make the demons take more interest in the human world. Either way, if my experiment was successful, then I could apply it in South Korea. It would be more efficient if I could breed a large number of creatures that matched the wavelength of the dungeon. While I concentrated on these matters, I had Chrisley search the Japan dungeon with the Pyrox. The first thing I did was separate the creatures by floor. The goblins were on the first floor, the kobolds the second, the gnolls the third, the fourth floor were the orcs, and the fifth floor the trolls. Now that they were separated, the natural predators disappeared. The specific reproduction of the goblins. It will change when predators are gone. I was most interested in the goblins. I wondered whether a large number of arc goblins were born to protect themselves from enemies, or if it was influenced by the wavelength of the dungeon. There was a noticeable change in the reproductive rate. The birth rate lowered after the predators disappeared. After observing for 1 week, I was able to determine that it was reduced by 30%. This is somewhat credible. In addition, the goblins had a hard time giving birth. 8 of them would die at once, so the population would rapidly decrease in 6 months. With no natural predators, it showed a similar birth rate to the dungeon in South Korea. I saw it as natural selection. I needed to make certain choices if I wanted to maintain the population at a constant ratio. But I confirmed that the main cause of death was dystocia. The survival rate is very high. 537 goblins were born in a week. 519 safely came into the world. 18 had died due to dystocia. That was different from my dungeon. The death rate of the goblins in South Korea due to dystocia was 20%. If this place was South Korea's dungeon, then 100 out of 537 would have died. The difference between the figures were too big. There is something. This feeling was never wrong. If Japan's dungeon was optimized to goblins, then the South Korea dungeon must be optimized to a certain creature. It might be due to the wavelength of the dungeon or the climate and environment. A source that allows the creatures to live in the dungeons. However, this transition doesn't always match their body. If Japan is goblins, I need to find out the breed for the South Korea dungeon. All the creatures I've summoned so far, all of them failed to show optimization. I had no choice but to individually check the different species. Of course, it would be foolish to fill the dungeon only with creatures matching the wavelength. If Japan's dungeon was only filled with goblins, then the weakness is obvious. I need to reasonably adjust the ratio. I just have to reference this. I thought about it in advance. This was the type of worry associated with developing a country. At any rate, it would help the development of the dungeon to find the species that matched the wavelength. This was still a hypothesis, but if my theory was correct, then I wouldn't need to waste a large number of points. My dungeon master. I found a place that I think is the altar of fire. Chrisley came with the griffin and Pyrox. I looked at her for a moment. Even the griffin seemed to be obedient to Chrisley. Anyway, she came at the right time. I ended domestic mode. The only things left would take time. I nodded and said, "Guide me." All dungeons contained 4 altars with different attributes. The altar regulated the internal flow of magic power and maintained the powerful barrier outside the dungeon. If all 4 altars collapsed, then the barrier would disappear and the dungeon would be exposed to human firearms. Therefore, each altar had 2 advanced golems protecting it. They were set to automatically attack if someone other than the dungeon master approached. In contrast, the dungeon master could move them in any way. But I was more curious about the message left by the gods. Sentences that required 100 intelligence to read. I wondered why such high intelligence was needed, as I had never heard of a demon reaching 100 intelligence. It meant that the demons couldn't reach 100 intelligence. Then the gods determined that I would someday reach 100 intelligence after returning and set that as the triggering condition. Of course, the sentences wouldn't appear if I wasn't near. I checked it through Chrisley. Isn't it too easy to obtain? This was a gift. It would be fine without the trigger condition. But it was easy to obtain and easy to use. Wasn't there any restrictions? The degree of the gift was a griffin. The level might be low, but it was still a high-class creature. A creature that was sufficient as a hidden card. I judged that there must be some conditions. Something that could be easily found with 100 intelligence. If I reached it, then I could receive the gift. But I didn't reach 100 intelligence. I could only read it because of Chrisley. Like right now. This is the place of a fallen god. Here is our grave and our shackles. We have returned to our origins. I am the earth god Jeb. Together with my will, receive my last gift. South Korea's dungeon had words left by the god of wisdom Minerva. Now Chrisley read similar but subtly different words. Minerva spoke about the place inside the dungeon, while Jeb seemed to give a cryptic phrase. Grave and shackles. Return to the origins. I pondered on the meaning for a moment. Kururung. A crack above the altar. Chaotic and holy magic power from Jeb rose in the local area. A huge creature soon appeared through the tear in space. Gigantes. 4 meters tall. A giant warrior wearing black helmet and armor. Red eyes that reminded me of the dignity of a high-class creature could be seen in the opening of the helmet. Similar to the griffin that could be called a 1LV high-class creature. I opened mind's eye with dry lips. Name. Gigantes. Stats. Strength 94, Intelligence 71. Agility 75, Stamina 92. Magic Power 74. Potential. 406 414. Uniqueness. A black knight of the giant species that is a close aid to the earth god Jeb. He has a very noble character. He will not bow his head to anyone. Passing a test is required to obtain him. Skill. Gigantic Slash, Epic, Arms of the Earth, XU. Gigantes. He was looking at me with very angry eyes. It seemed a test was needed. I started laughing. Let's take a look. TL note. Due to the nature of the Korean language, it isn't explicitly stated whether Guyo is a male or female. I'm just going to leave it as male unless I learn otherwise. Then I will change it. Chapter 55 to 56, Gigantes. 94 strength and 92 stamina. These two physical abilities were over 90. I was well ahead in magic power. I need to raise my intelligence as soon as possible. It was disgraceful that I was lagging behind Gigantes in intelligence. However, I decided not to invest the remaining points in intelligence. I took out Wrath. Chrisley, I am going. Chrisley's eyes were very wide and she said in a worried tone. Will you be okay? I won't fight a losing battle. I wouldn't come out if I wasn't qualified. Gigantes might have the advantage in physical ability, but that was it. The total sum of my stats was similar to Gigantes. I would use my strong attack skills, techniques and judgment to win. Chrisley glanced at Gigantes before bowing to me. Please be careful, my dungeon master. Soon Chrisley led the griffin and Pyrox away from the altar. I also commanded the 2 fire golems guarding the altar to move out of here. The golems pushed through the thin walls until I was left alone with Gigantes. You have been waiting a long time. You defeat me, then I will follow. This place was prepared for me. Gigantes had a short pronunciation. I held Wrath and took an attack stance. I was going to do that from the beginning. Paranormal. Paranormal was a unique grade ring. An item that would randomly trigger one of 5 blessings. Paranormal's blessing. A powerful attraction has been granted. I clicked my tongue. I was given Charm. It was actually the most useless blessing. Kung. I strongly pushed off with my feet. Jijijik. At the same time, an electric current spread through my body. I momentarily reached out for Lightning God. I could confirm it through my inner eyes. I could take advantage of magic power. I preferred a fierce struggle involving sweat and blood, but this would still work. I took advantage of magic power when using skills. Kururung. Gigantes struck the ground with a large hexagonal-shaped club. The dungeon started endlessly ringing. 94 strength. An incredible power that could push a mountain. I wouldn't survive if I was standing in front of it. My stamina was 82, so it was a little low to defend against gigantes. Now, however, the large actions meant it was easy to avoid. Luckily Gigante's agility wasn't high, so I could read his movements. I struck with wrath the moment Gigante's club hit the ground. Shawaruru. A strong current flowed from wrath towards the ground. The current soon reached the club that Gigante's hands were wrapped around. Hup. There was a relationship between intelligence and magic power. And Gigantes didn't have high magic power. Lightning God technique was able to deal a decisive blow thanks to that. Gigante's hands momentarily loosened from the club. I immediately removed Wrath from the ground and kicked off. I jumped high in the air and aimed Wrath at Gigantes. No matter how high the stamina, there was no creature that could survive losing its head or heart. But my plan was doomed to fail in the execution stage. Kurururing. The ground of the dungeon surged up to defend Gigante's head. But I couldn't break it because it wasn't ordinary rock. Kakong. The problem was that it was strengthened by a skill. Arms of the Earth, XU, skill. A specialized skill for defense. Wrath couldn't pierce the wall and Gigantes strongly swung his club. Dangerous. The club was being filled with a strong magic power. Gigantes had 2 skills and the remaining Gigantic Slash, Epic, was used. Gigantic Slash wasn't a skill that I could counter. I hastily retreated as Gigantes prepared the attack. Gigantes wielded the club that had a significant amount of condensed magic power. Quang. Intense vibrations. The surrounding pressure was sucked into the club. A 10 meters large crack was formed. It stretched out along the ground and walls. I barely managed to avoid being hit by it. Truly an epic level, it was comparable to the Griffin's lightning. Rather, the attack power seemed slightly stronger. The Griffin's lightning attack was a wide area attack while Gigante's skill was more concentrated. I frowned. Once the skill ended, half of the altar had vanished without a trace. It isn't impossible to repair, but literally a mess. I seemed to have chosen the wrong place. It was evident that the altar would require a considerable amount of time to fix. Either way, I could be sure of one thing with this attack. Not that bad. I didn't have to use the Wrath skill. I calmly looked at Gigantes. Arms of the Earth gave him superior defense, but Gigantes couldn't attack while it was active. It also took a little bit of time to trigger. And Gigantic Slash exerted absolute havoc, but it was easily avoided. I should target these 2 properties. I determined my course of action and immediately jumped up again. Gigantes was also aware that I was floating in the air. He tried to swing his club at me as I struck his body with Wrath. Cheek. Wrath scratched Gigantes. My physical ability was lower, but I used technique to my advantage. I narrowed the distance to Gigantes' throat. If I was this close, then Arms of the Earth wouldn't trigger. Paysac. I used all my power to pierce his neck, but it couldn't go in deeply. I struggled to cut the skin. I wasn't embarrassed to stick my body close to Gigantes. My strength is low, but that isn't the reason. It feels like I am hitting a wall. Does Arm of the Earth also enhance the physical abilities of the body? Dirt seemed to fall from the cut on his neck. Tisk. I didn't think there would be a second wall around the body. Grr. But that didn't mean nothing happened. Gigantes had hard skin, but I used magic power. The magic power that filled Wrath caused damage to the wound. Mischief. Here, up. Gigantes was very angry. Smoke rose from his body as he started gathering power. Gigantes was preparing Gigantic Slash. I quickly switched from offense to defense and prepared for the shock. But this Gigantic Slash had a subtly different feel to it. It will hit everywhere. I started frowning. I deemed that it was impossible to avoid, so I poured all my power into the Lightning God technique. I would use it to offset the Gigantic Slash. There were a difference in the skill rating, but I had much higher magic power. I poured all my power into the skill. But it didn't take me long to figure out that it was the wrong decision. Kuong. It seemed like a lightning storm was occurring. It was a disaster because the slash wasn't lacking magic power. The vibration of this Gigantic Slash couldn't compare to the one before. The width was dozens of meters. I pulled up all my magic power with gritted teeth. I overlapped the wavelength of magic power in order to increase the density. The layered electric shield stood before me to block the Gigantic Slash. Jik. I had created exactly 7 layers. 7 layers was the limit of the Lightning God technique, but it was instantly being peeled off by Gigantic Slash. Second layer. 4th layer, 6th layer. Finally the 7th layer of the shield broke. The damage of gigantic slash had greatly decreased during this time, but I was forced to face the rest with my body. Cough. The slash hit my chest. I was forced backwards and coughed up blood. It is unfortunate. I wiped off the blood at my lips while confirming the injury. There was a large wound from my shoulder to my belly button. It scratched the sleeping lightning god at the same time. Blood relentlessly flowed. If I dragged the time out, then it would become more disadvantageous. Should I use the wrath skill? Oddly enough, I had a strange confidence that I could win without using wrath. I was experiencing the aftermath of the attack, so I couldn't understand it. Cough. But, at that moment my body started feeling feverish. This feeling was similar to when I received the heart of the Hell Monarch. Blood started moving around my entire body. Magic power was flowing from my heart. The magic power flowing fiercely started eroding my entire body. My expression hardened. The flow of magic power is reversing. I gritted my teeth. Magic power reversal. A phenomenon that could kill a demon. I had already experienced something like this. I knew the feeling well. Definitely. The power from gigantic slash had flowed into my heart. The magic power contained in the heart of the Hell Monarch transcended imaginable levels. But if it awakened, then it would increase my magic power and intelligence. Fighting gigantes wouldn't be a problem. I urgently focused mentally. I corrected the flow of magic power. The maximum amount of magic power was given to the heart while the rest was focused on repairing the wounds. Potions or elixirs wouldn't be helpful. Forcefully sealing the magic power might cause unknown side effects. The only way was to restore the magic power reversal. But an unexpected thing happened once again. I had been hit by gigantic slash between my heart and my belly button. Lightning god sleeping underneath my belly button started waking up. Then it swallowed up handfuls of the magic power like it was hungry? Lightning god was incapable of going near my heart. It acted like it was fleeing from a horrible existence. Now it wasn't acting like that. It was defiantly gobbling up the magic power. I stopped putting boundaries on the magic power. So it started overflowing again. It would be beneficial if I could reduce it. In my calculations there weren't any losses. Thus Lightning God started devouring the magic power. At that time, all my focus was on Lightning God. Heart of the Hell Monarch has woken up. Lightning God technique, U, has evolved to Lightning Elemental, Epic. Lightning Elemental is a common property of the spirits. It has been reborn as a special spirit after swallowing the magic power of a true demonic dragon, dark elf and hell monarch. I opened my eyes. The sight before me didn't look any different from before. But a very big change had happened inside me. I could be certain of one thing. My spirit felt refreshed. My magic power was stable and it also healed my injuries. Lightning God was even more lively than before. Status window. I could easily see the changes this way. The status window soon surfaced in front of me. Name: Randolph Brigzeal. Occupation: Demon Earl. Dungeon Master. Title: Dungeon Hunter. Residual stats +1 when occupying dungeons and hunting demons. Asterisk: Indomitable Warrior. XU. All stats +2. Asterisk: First to receive a fairy's blessing. U. Magic +6. Stats: Strength 79, +9, Intelligence 72, +2. Agility 74, +2, Stamina 80, +2. Magic Power 85, +8. Potential 390 +23 500ths. Remaining stat points 3. Electric Power 16 gigawatts. Uniqueness: Heart of the Hell Monarch has woken up. Skill combination: R, Mind's Eye, XU, Lightning Elemental, Epic, Wrath, Epic. Before and after comparison: Strength 88, Intelligence 66, Agility 76, Stamina 82, Magic 90, Potential 379 +23 500ths. Strength 88, Intelligence 74, Agility 76, Stamina 82, Magic 93, Potential 390 +23 500ths. Intelligence had greatly increased. It rose by 8. It was as sweet as discovering an oasis in the desert. My low intelligence was already holding me back. And magic power by 3. It was remarkable considering that my magic power had already reached 90. Also, my original 4 gigawatts electric power had instantly transformed into 16 gigawatts. 1 GW was 1000 megawatts, so it had grown by 250 times. Considering that original figures of the 12-star lightning god technique, it had increased by 4 times. Finally, the skill had changed. The 3 question marks had disappeared and it changed into lightning elemental, epic. A epic grade spirit? Almost none of the common spirits reached beyond the rare rating. An epic rating was equivalent to a high-class spirit. I called lightning god out of my body. Come out, Jijik. The form of a snake made out of lightning emerged as I called. It was only the size of a skull, but it gave off a strong presence. This snake was lightning god. The snake didn't look that different from the way I imagined it when it was wandering in my body. I nodded and turned my head. You have been waiting a long time. You blocked it. Changed. I wait. You, knight? Gigantes looked at me with curiosity. I just laughed. I had blocked the maximum power gigantic slash. The status window said that Gigantes was a knight of a god. He had high intelligence and respected the opponent. That's why he didn't attack me. A gift is a gift. It was a welcome but unexpected gift. This whole thing hadn't gone as I planned, but surprises like these were the fun part of the devil's game. Even if I returned, thinking of all the elements waiting for me that I hadn't experienced in my previous life made me excited. The path wasn't fixed. The path to the devil's throne wouldn't be smooth. Reaching the peak of the demon world was my goal. That was the only reason to get my hands on the name, devil. I was convinced from the time I first made that goal. Then the second round will start. It was the start of a full-fledged struggle. Lightning God evolved into a lightning spirit. At first I thought it was the size of a skull, but it gradually became bigger during the battle. Soon the snake was large enough to be called a type of dragon. The epic grade skill used my high magic power to drill through gigantic slash. The electric power is rapidly reducing. I had a total of 16 gigawatts. 1 GW was disappearing every minute. This meant Lightning God would work for 16 minutes tops. 16 minutes is not enough. However, Lightning God definitely came in handy. It could neutralize gigantic slash and penetrate through arm of the earth. Gigantes couldn't withstand the high magic power accumulated in each strike. He only endured due to his high magic power. Kawa, Gigantes couldn't think straight due to the attack on all sides from Lightning God. It was just a matter of time. Eventually Lightning God entered his body. It is certainly a great power. Gigantes looked a little tired. Lightning God shut down the pure muscles. He had transcended the border of 90 stat points. But it was impossible for him to cut of the magic power. Electric power reduced twice as fast. There was only a few minutes remaining at most. I needed to bring an end to this now. What, this? You, no, this can't be. Gigantes shouted like a beast. I shrugged. I gained a new skill thanks to the time you gave me. Weren't you aware that I changed? Gigantes had noticed the changes inside my body. He waited until the change was completed. Therefore he didn't have the right to complain about the skill. As expected, the furious Gigantes couldn't fight anymore. Grr, lost. Did I pass the test? Yes, you, I now follow. Hawirarik, I put away Wrath and Lightning God. Lightning God rapidly became smaller as it was sucked into my body. 2 high-class creatures, Griffin and Gigantes. It was a ridiculous performance for less than 2 years. High-class creatures were very limited until the second half of the war. Only dukes or above could handle a high-class creature. I looked at Gigantes with pleasure. Kung. Then the wounded Gigantes kneeled down. Master. I exited the altar with Gigantes. Chrisley was waiting for me in front of the wall. You're safe. You must have been worried. I spoke like it wasn't a big deal. The magic power reversal was a bit dangerous, but I still had the Wrath skill remaining. But the result was like I expected. I am your faithful servant. I spend every day worrying about you. Tell me if there are any problems. I feel good today, so I will listen. I obtained a lot. Having a high-class creature with a certain degree of intelligence like Gigantes would solve some of my problems. It also felt good to have my skill rating increase. Then Chrisley said with pink cheeks. Then, my dungeon master. Tonight, she didn't say anything else. But I could understand her meaning. There had been little contact with Chrisley since the ceremony. And after going through several dangers, I also felt desire swell. There is no need to wait for night. I roughly kissed Chrisley. My consciousness was engrossed and I didn't come out until 3 days later. The task of taking over the Japan dungeon. I obtained a few items that originally belonged to Adol. Modified Dungeon Crystal Ball and Seed of the World Tree. This is good. The Dungeon Crystal Ball was a magic item that allowed me to see inside the dungeon. It required 100,000 points to purchase, so I gratefully accepted it from Adol. And the Seed of the World Tree. It was a useful item to change the terrain. If I planted the Seed of the World Tree, then a dense forest would grow overnight. A size that couldn't be compared to the small forest that Yi made. It would be impossible to get through one layer of the forest. An item that wasn't mentioned in the shop. I remember it came out a few times in the Demon World auction. But the Seed of the World Tree hadn't come out in the previous auction. This meant Adol gained it separately, but I didn't know the source. Anyway, it would be very effective when planting it in an area of dark elves. Due to the nature of the elves, the forest would get more power. If I was lucky, then a world tree might emerge. There was only a small chance, but a world tree emerging would give many effects. Increasing the propagation rate or elements, it was an item I expected a lot from. The connection of the link? Just a little bit more. The fairy Guyo was busy concentrating at the dungeon core. It was to create a link between the South Korean and Japanese dungeons. As the dungeon master of the South Korea dungeon, I could create a link with any dungeon identified as my dungeon. I didn't have to walk back to South Korea's dungeon. And it was like I expected. Ah, master, the link is connected. The dungeon core started to resonate. Kuuong. The barrier outside the dungeon was released for a while as a magic wavelength connected between the dungeons in South Korea and Japan. Meanwhile, all the creatures between the dungeon instinctively dropped from the intense magic power. A red light stretched in a straight line from the dungeon core. A light of the same color came from the South Korea dungeon and met in the middle of the Sea of Japan. The lights tangled with each other. It furiously moved up and down before the light barrier was completed between Japan and South Korea. An overwhelming sight. Everyone was captivated looking at it. This barrier disappeared after approximately 30 seconds. That's great. At that moment, a magic circle was engraved near the dungeon core. I left Japan's dungeon with the creatures. The dungeon in South Korea hadn't changed a lot. Yi flapped her wings crazily. Master, who is Guyo? Huh? Who is that bum? I believed. Yi is disappointed because I thought I was your only fairy. Is it because of the position of Fairy King? Don't worry, so far you have the upper hand. The position of the Fairy King. A competition between the fairies. The Fairy King didn't mean they became stronger, but they could stand above other fairies. Therefore, the strongest candidate would become the next Fairy King. The fairy had a spiritual body and a long lifespan. Yi is still disappointed. Master made Yi sad. Now I don't want to give you honey anymore. Little thing. Rude. What are you? Yi had never seen Gigantes before. She stared. Little thing. Master, rude. She came to the conclusion that Gigantes had a horribly scary face. Yi furtively glanced at Gigantes. Why Yi? This. Do you think I am scared? Why Yi is the fairy of this dungeon core. If you are mean, then Yi will feed you to the bees. I won't forgive you. Yi placed both hands on her waist. However, she was still avoiding his gaze. Even the fairy of the dungeon core was afraid of Gigante's face. I shook my head and said, Yi, tell me the history of the creatures you purchased from the store. I plan to breed a species that fits South Korea's dungeon. Yi pointed her finger. Why you? Today you are lucky. Why you should thank Master. Yi was going to punish you. Today I am busy, so I will skip it. Yi said this, but her body was shaking. Anyway, she was the subdued winner in the showdown with Gigantes. Chapter 57 to 60. Breeding species. South Korea, Japan and the world were surprised. There was no precedent for creatures emerging from a dungeon only to move to another dungeon. The lich in the army of creatures was enough to cause astronomical damage. In addition, resistance was impossible. The one who referred to themselves as a dungeon master was a beautiful woman with long ears. Her emergence was the most crucial thing. The ones who dwelled on the top floor of the dungeon. A god, ruler of another world, or even an alien. There was various types of theories. If humans reached beyond their limit and arrived on the top floor, then they could find the truth. But then something unpredictable happened. Everyone was focused on the message left by the dungeon master. Climb up to the top floor. Then I will tell you the truth of the world. The world's scholars analyzed and studied the truth of the world, but it was ambiguous. After 2 days, an amazing sight was seen between South Korea and Japan. A surge of magic power. And a barrier of light. In particular, South Korea and Japan were in an uproar. A sign that the world is ending. I will follow her. People predicted the end of the world. Even ordinary people could feel the intense surge of magic power as their hearts beat wildly. The awakened familiar with magic power couldn't sleep for 3 days and nights. Everybody wondered what happened between the 2 dungeons, but the truth wasn't revealed to humans. And various groups started to worship the dungeon master as God. People who felt fear instinctively started to follow the strongest. Meanwhile, Japan asked South Korea to take responsibility. It was a funny story, but the creatures from South Korea traveled to Japan. They wanted South Korea to reimburse them for the astronomical damage, but South Korea was still recovering. In the end, Japan is anxious to turn public opinion and started to blame South Korea. This caused the relations between the 2 countries to worsen. A few months passed, but public opinion was still gloomy. Thousands of people crossed the river of no return overnight. Suicide. The rate of domestic crime plummeted sharply. Something was needed to break through the atmosphere. South Korea's leaders selected the awakened. Orcs are swarming 150 meters to the left. Guarders forward. Damage dealers circle closely while ranged users ready your skills. Don't just believe in the healers. They have to prioritize their own safety. Don't let our ranks be disturbed. South Korea dungeon's 4th floor. The awakened holding weapons were greeted by a swarm of orcs. Originally capturing the 4th floor was a long time away, but the country's mood meant the awakened's rapid growth was inevitable. The awakened felt overwhelming fear at the army of creatures, but something grew in their bodies at the same time. The heroes were growing. This was attributed to the hope that they would someday reach the dungeon master. All 5 guilds organized a raid force. There were exactly 120 of them. Each guild sent 24 and they managed to reach the 4th floor. But in the process of reaching the 4th floor, 20 of them died. However, the 4th floor had too many orcs. Orcs were the only things that could be seen. In the meantime, the awakened had grown and the elite members could take on the orcs 1-to-1. 100 elite awakened had gathered here. A handful of orcs weren't a problem. As many as 20 to 100 orcs would appear. There was so many of them that it was frustrating. That is the way to the 5th floor. We just need to pass this crisis, but then we will be stepping foot in the unknown. Forward. Their abilities rose against the orcs. This was much faster growth than the lower floors. The added ability and experience meant they could grow rapidly on the 5th floor. Queek. Roughly 80 orcs appeared. The awakened were prepared. Uni. I don't have a good feeling. It is okay. Haven't we broken through up to here? If only Captain Nim was here. Where on earth did he go? On the stairs to the 5th floor. Yoon Hai gently nodded at Lee Ji Hai's grumbling. The females of Devil Hunters were also included in this raid. Uni, our Captain Nim. After the second monster wave stopped, where did he go? The dungeon master admitted that their captain was the strongest among the awakened on that day. He then disappeared like he evaporated. He hadn't been seen since the mess in South Korea. Lee Ji Hai shrugged. Let's see? He is like Hong Gil Dong. He will suddenly show up one day. Even so, he abandons us until that time. I'm very upset. Yoon Hai and Lee Ji Hai weren't included in the monster wave attack. They were indignant but absolutely obeyed their captain. Are we still not enough? Heheng, weren't we specifically chosen by the guild? Yoon Hai's growth was dazzling. She experienced a change in her skill and trained even harder. Yes, you are excellent. Lee Ji Hai laughed. The awakened finally set foot on the 5th floor. Yoon Hai shook her head. There is something different here. Hasn't the dungeon changed? This is the form of a somber cave. The captain of the Mithril Guild raised his hand. There is a lot of mud in front. Be careful when moving. Kawang. It was at that moment. The muddy area started to join together. The mud united into the form of a mud golem. Those watching the scene were at a loss for words. Kung, Kuang. Other mud golems emerged. The awakened were urgent as they noticed the puppet dolls next to them. Prepare to fight. Keep your ranks. In the end, the 100 awakened decided to retreat. There wasn't that many of them, but the orcs were no comparison. Of course, there was a chance they could break through the mud golems and puppet dolls. But then the harpies appeared in their air. It was an irreversible situation, so they made a judgment. They decided to retreat. Their numbers were reduced by half by the time they came out of the dungeon. However, they obtained good quality magic items on the 3rd and 4th floor. The 5th floor was a place of frustration, but the embers of hope weren't extinguished. If they knew a little bit more about the creatures on the 5th floor, then they could come up with a strategy to penetrate through. The eyes of the awakened became more intense due to the death of their colleagues. Shaw shaw. I grabbed the neck of the young creature. With the lower half of a snake and the upper half similar to humans, this species was incredibly poisonous and dangerous to touch. But that didn't apply to me. Shaw, the 3-month-old young were playing around me. Those that were still young tried to attack me with their long tongues. There were many young creatures that showed a similar rate of growth. Nothing strange has been seen yet. I touched my jaw. I wanted to find a decent breeding species for the South Korean dungeon. I used 7,500 points on the young creatures, but none of them showed a noticeable growth. A large majority of the pyrock larvae died before they became adults. And it was the same for the other young. I had purchased 10 young creatures to figure out the effects of the wavelength of magic power. 20 adults were also purchased, but I couldn't help having high hopes for the newly born creatures. I let go of the neck of the young creature and moved to the next floor. I was currently on the 12th floor. The 13th floor was selected to breed the werewolf species. The giant wolves were 2 meters in size with purple fur. They were capable of bipedal movement and had the mane of a lion. They were 3 LV intermediate like the dark elves, but their aggressive tendencies made them very strong. Kaikong. I scratched the ears of the werewolves. This was the first time I was visiting the nest of the young werewolves just born. Werewolves were famous for their strong maternal love. But she just sat there and restlessly watched me. Well, I don't know yet. There were 3 pups. There didn't seem to be any mutations. Their growth rate was similar to that of a general werewolf. It wasn't at a level that would catch his eye. I moved to the next place. 14th floor. This floor was for the lizardmen and trolls. The 2 species had a bad relationship and tended to get into fights. I deliberately placed those 2 species on the same floor in the hope that a stronger species would be born due to the struggle. Yet the reproduction rate of the 2 species were very small. I didn't have an infinite amount of points, so I limited it to 30 of each species. The competition means that the breeding rate increased by 1.5 times. The problem is that many of them die. Unique bodies also couldn't be found. Was it too short a time? I checked on a daily basis but couldn't distinguish any differences that would be caused by the wavelength of the dungeon's magic power. Maybe the werewolf, lizardmen, and trolls didn't match the magic power. I moved to the 15th floor where the dark elves lived. The seed of the world tree had been planted and a forest grew overnight. I opened up a little bit of my magic power. It is great to see Dungeon Master. The chief of the dark elves, Julium, came to greet me. After that, some of the other dark elves came. Where are the rest? Their numbers seemed very low. Julium answered my question. They are moving timber to the 7th floor to be used for the houses of the dwarves. The rest are making sure the seed of the world tree sprouts properly. It won't be easy. It is the seed of the world tree, but most of the world trees have died. In my previous life, there was only one demon who succeeded in obtaining a world tree. Grand Duke Okulos. His dungeon was impregnable due to the world tree. The growth rate of the creatures rose and earth elementals were naturally produced. In addition, the leaves of the world tree increased the healing rate. The roots were excellent materials that could be used to make unique rated products. In addition, the world tree led to a rise in mutations and allowed more unique creatures to form. It was a blessed fortress. Anyway, Okulos managed to obtain the world tree. After that, he received many challenges, but all of them failed. I didn't know how he did it. My luck has to be good. Having great expectations would lead to disappointment. I was interested in the world tree from the beginning. We will spare no effort to make the world tree bud. Julium spoke in a serious tone. The dark elves were ultimately elves. They would feel great pride if they managed to make the world tree grow. 2 world trees existed in the demon world. Powerful dark elves were allowed to live there, but they were denied permission to go near those places. That's why Chrisley was so important to them. Either way, they would receive direct benefits if there was a world tree on the 15th floor. I could understand their desire. I didn't need to pour cold water on them. Striving so hard to chase something deserved praise. It meant they would be productive. I scratched my chin and said, "Do you have any news to convey to me?" News. I heard that 2 babies were born not long ago. 2 days ago, Chrisley had told me very excitedly that 2 children were born. I wondered if they might be affected by the wavelength of magic power. The Dark Elves couldn't avoid it. Julian clapped his hands. "Oh, you mean the twins. I was thinking about having Dungeon Master see them after the ceremony." "You were just in time to see them. The Dark Elves had a special ceremony for the naming." Julian had a very thrilled expression on his face. He interpreted it as the Dungeon Master showing interest. I had no intention of releasing that misconception, so I just nodded. "I will see them. I will bring you to them." Julian talked to some Dark Elves near him. They couldn't ignore the procession of the Dungeon Master. This was an unusual luxury, so they didn't feel bad. I moved slowly through the forest with Julian. This forest was made with the seed of the World Tree. There is definitely a concentration of magic power. It wasn't the magic power of the World Tree, but it was enough to help the Dark Elves. Maybe it would appear in the future. The Dark Elves weren't greedy, and even the emergence of the timber satisfied them. After 10 minutes, I walked to a small house made of woven vegetation. This was the newly created residence of the Dark Elves. It was immediately built after I allowed them to tear down the shit-shaped structure that Yi made. This is the place. Dungeon Master. In the middle of the settlement. Unlike the other residences, it was a huge house. This house is made with the best quality wood and a full weave. The Dark Elves will stay at home for 3 days after their children are born. They need to eat leaves and dew for the ritual blessing. Julian gave a separate explanation. The house seemed to be a substitute for the World Tree. If they succeeding in germinating the seed, then the ceremonies would take place under the World Tree. The house looks quite good. If Dungeon Master wants, then I will build you a large house on the top floor. It is an interesting suggestion, but Yi won't stay quiet. The fairy will definitely complain. Yi was the owner of a strange taste. She created structures with an incomprehensible design. If a conventional wooden house was raised on the top floor, then only complaints would come from her mouth. Dungeon Master has come. Dungeon Master has come. I passed a bunch of Dark Elves who respectfully bowed their heads. I ignored them and entered the house where the ceremony was being held. It looked like a 2-story building from the outside, but it was just 1 floor with a high roof. 2 children were wrapped in large leaves. These are the twins who were just born. The one on the left is a girl while the other one is a boy. There were adult Dark Elves in the house. Not just anyone could enter before the ceremony finished. I came closer to the children. Kyle, Kiaruru Tilda. There was no animosity from their magic power as the children looked at me. I used mind's eye on the 2 children. Name: none. Occupation none. Title none. Stats: Strength 1, Intelligence 4, Agility 1, Stamina 2, Magic Power 13, Potential 21 384. Uniqueness: 51 hours has passed since being born. Skill: none. I was surprised at the status window. The children had identical status windows like a printed book. But I was surprised at their potential. They were Dark Elves. It was low compared to Krasla and Chrisley, but the quality was enough to give them the value of an advanced 5 LV creature. Of course, this was just potential. Still, the important part was clear. South Korea's dungeon is appropriate for breeding Dark Elves? I couldn't confirm it yet. There were only 2. A little more experimenting was required. And maybe this was just a trait of this Dark Elf tribe. I couldn't rule out the possibility of the Dark Elves had slight traces of the true demonic dragon's blood in them. The result was an outstanding genius like Chrisley. It might just be because of good blood. Sometimes that could happen. The blood might decline, but the genetic materials would still be passed down, sometimes surpassing the limits of the species. I couldn't rule out the possibility that this was one such incident. That, Dungeon Master. Julian spoke carefully. I turned and looked at Julian. Go ahead. Would you give names to the children? Name? I asked with wonder. It was the first time someone had asked me to name something. Julian replied seriously. That's correct. It would be a huge blessing if Dungeon Master names the two children. How blatant. I started laughing. Juliam's intentions were easy to read. He wanted me to accept Chrisley more fully in my heart. Juliam's face was flushed and very easy to read. I did not like this. If Juliam didn't take advantage of an opportunity like this, then I would consider him incompetent. I knew one or two ways to solve it. This was still within my tolerance limit. And if there were results, then I would give him a reward. There would be more guarantees at a later date. Juliam sensed the subtle signs and urgently kneeled down with his forehead to the ground. Don't misunderstand, Dungeon Master. The Dark Elves understand that we are your subjects. We are your faithful servants. Faithful slaves. This is just for the sake of Chrisley's peace and happiness. And since this is the first time children are born since we've been here, our tribe would be honored if you name them. We don't expect more than that. I thought that attitude was dramatic. It was like they had been waiting for a chance to receive names. It must be some sort of habit. It wasn't like I intended, but I opened my mouth. Rise, Cheok. Juliam immediately got up. I told him, the boy will be Roy. The girl rose. Juliam swallowed his saliva and asked, may I ask what that means? I was silent for a moment. What was with this neurosis-like reaction? Juliam's nervousness over the names was irritating. He seemed to think he would be punished like a dog again. Brave and good, thank you. In the future, the children's name will be Roy and Rose. The meaning of the names didn't matter. I smiled while looking at the children. Due to nature of the dungeon, they would grow quickly and become full-fledged dark elves in a few years. If their potential filled up, then it was like getting hundreds of thousands of points for free. They would fight for me in the future. I touched the cheeks of the two children before turning away. Dungeon Master, there will be a celebration to commemorate today. It would be an honor if you participate. I'm busy. Juliam thought it was regretful but didn't mention it again. He knew that I hated things being repeated. Now I should look at the dwarves. I left the house and headed to the 7th floor. Unfortunately, there weren't that many dwarves. They were busy building houses for when the awakened would visit in the future. A workshop was also built. I could see separate building tools. They would be tricking the human awakened, so planning would make things much easier in the future. Creatures giving quests to human awakened. Each awakened could be given regular or randomly occurring quests that would give them skills, items, stats, etc. They needed to pay attention to irregular things. Arriving at a specific location or finding a specific animal. I hoped that the awakened would become curious about the quests. And if possible, I hoped to attract more awakened to the dungeon at the same time. The awakened could receive the quests in a group. If they formally registered the quest, then the rewards would be divided. It was literally food to move the awakened. It would be worth a try. The problem is still the breeding. Everything was going smoothly, but there was one thing. Breeding a species that matched the dungeon's magic power. Time is on my side. I couldn't be impatient. I could return at any time. Right now, this was worrying me, so I needed to see it through to the end. I carefully started to search. I compared them to the creatures living in Japan's dungeon. It was a very time-consuming task, but I put in effort and care. I focused carefully, and as a result, I managed to find one unique point in South Korea's dungeon. The creatures of the animal species are more active. The subtle potential is high. The speed of reproduction is also significant. In contrast to Japan's dungeon, I searched through hundreds of specimens. This explains the rampant meatbats on the first floor of the dungeon. I saw the abnormal proliferation of the meatbats and solved it with their enemy, the ale snakes. But that reproduction speed alone didn't make it suited to the dungeon. It was just one of many criteria. Now that I knew the wavelength fit animals, it was time to take the next step. Minotaur, mammoth, saber tiger, dark bear. I decided to add 4 different species to the dungeon for reproduction. Each species had a distinct attribute. The minotaur was an ox, the mammoth an elephant, saber tiger a tiger, and dark bear a bear. And all of them were intermediate 3LV creatures. It was an enormous but necessary expenditure. Anyway, breeding the species would naturally reduce costs. This wasn't an investment loss. The moment he added the 4 species to the dungeon. Great achievement. 15 species that can be properly reproduced with each other have been released in the dungeon for the first time. 600,000 PT will be paid. This achievement. I looked at the floating message with curiosity. A first achievement. The reward was greater than those of typical achievements. A huge 600,000 points. A significant portion of the points used to purchase the creatures was recovered. An accomplishment regarding the breeding species. I stroked my jaw. This meant there were achievements related to breeding species. Taking all the first achievements. I was hoping for that. If I found the right key, then I could sweep all the achievements. I might be able to gain extra points as income. A challenge. Seeing something through to the end was my nature. The same applied to this as well. One side of my mouth raised as I started to worry about the achievements. A remarkable achievement. The first hybrid has been successfully created. 350,000 PT will be paid. The result was as expected. Talk. I clapped. I bred a werewolf and crazyhound and made a successful hybrid. This wasn't hard because they were both canines. Of course, this was almost impossible without the absolute authority of the dungeon master. The werewolves were proud wolves. They would never consent to mating with the crazyhound that was on a lower level than them. But if the mating succeeded, then they would look after their offspring. I looked at the pup covered in blood. It was literally a hybrid. The default name was Little Werewolf, and it looked like a werewolf but with shorter legs. The potential was also lower. But the important thing was the achievements. I gained significant revenue without spending a lot of points. In 2 months, I managed to collect 350,000 points. Currently, I was earning 40,000 a month from the Japanese dungeon. The South Korean income of 110,000 was quite amazing. Gather it little by little while preparing for the Demon World auction. It had been 9 months since the first Demon World auction. The Spirit World would have finished preparing the items for the next auction. It meant that Dubalong would soon be contacting me. And there will be massive monster waves occurring worldwide before the Demon World auction. It was the demons finishing their preparations. They observed and learned that points was needed from the first auction. And the monster waves would be used to try and secure more points. The main purpose of the monster wave was to hunt the awakened. I also moved the creatures against the awakened in South Korea and Japan and earned a great deal of points. Close to 500,000 points. Of those, I had 2.7 million points remaining. Originally I had 3.2 million, but I used 300,000 on the dungeon in Japan, and not long ago, I bought 40 dwarves for 200,000 points. And even if I rested quietly for the next 3 months, I would still receive 450,000 points. If I gained a few more achievements, then I could easily get 4 million points. 4 million points in 2 years. I could use those points to buy high-class creatures. My mouth twisted. How much had the other demons collected? At best, it would be 800,000 points in 1 year. But not all the demons would have that many points. I could be sure of one thing. There were many uses for points. Self-reinforcement, strengthening the dungeon, purchasing creatures, and various experiments. The demons wouldn't necessarily hand everything on the Demon World auction, especially since this was the 2nd year. But the basic preparation, 4 million, might be a little short. Even if I caused a monster wave, I could incite and tear up hundreds of awakened. I would gain approximately 150,000 points. Most of the achievements for the monster wave have been gobbled up. There were still more first achievements available when it came to breeding species. It was obvious that there were more achievements. I should have more than 4 million points by the time I traveled to the Demon World auction. After 1 more month, I was able to simultaneously gain 2 more achievements. Multiple message windows appeared in the air. Incredible achievement. The first one to succeed in raising 20 adult pyroks. The probability of the pyrok larvae becoming adults has increased by 1%. They are creatures that can't be sold in stores because of their awful survival rate. 450,000 PT will be paid. Great achievement. The first achievement for releasing 5 appropriate breeding species. 300,000 PT will be paid. These achievements came from 20 pyroks, fire slimes, lava spiders, fire lizards, and lower creatures released in the lava zone. This meant I reached 3.3 million points. I was proceeding steadily. The lava zone was a modified zone, but no more achievements appeared when I added several other species. Either way, it was a very satisfying result. The moment that I was laughing with pleasure. Achievement Quest Breeding Species. A quest available to a dungeon master who gained 1,000 related achievement points. Find and breed creatures that match the wavelength of the dungeon's magic power. The deadline is 45 days. The compensation will vary depending on the number of creatures and how well they match the wavelength of magic power. My smile was erased in an instant. Achievement quest? My head naturally tilted. I had heard of special quests, but this was the first time I saw achievement quests. Special quests were quests that automatically renewed after a certain period of time. There were a wide range reserved for awakened and demons, or quests that were only for demons. But I hadn't heard of the demons receiving other types of quests. No, I hadn't even thought about it. As this related to accomplishing 4 breeding-related achievements? It was definitely interesting. Besides, the quest content was related to the work I was going to do. Adol didn't receive this quest. The breeding species in Japan were the goblins. But Adol never received the quest. It meant the quest was impossible to get unless there were several achievements. I could tell from the state of the dungeon. I read the message floating in the air again before nodding. I should resolve this. Beast-type creatures had been released in advance. The 3 most active had expanded quickly. The numbers varied, but it was apparent there was a difference. Those with a matching magic power wavelength didn't just breed quicker. Magic power was a source of power. If this source existed, then something was bound to differ. Originally, animal-type creatures didn't adapt easily. They would only adapt after some time. But a dungeon with matching magic power was like a comfortable home. They didn't need time to adapt. There were 3 such species: Minotaur, Saber Tiger, and Dark Bear. Unlike the other 3, the mammoth looked very uncomfortable. The expansion in the area was slightly unnatural. It was often restless. I decided to save money on the mammoths. This was a conclusion I came to from close observation. The answer will emerge if I look at the bear cubs. And there were other variables. First, I had to pick the species that would take priority. Was the breeding rate okay? Was the potential higher on average compared to the same species? The growth rate and presence of anything unique. Experiment. In order to find a more reliable result, I doubled the number of creatures. The purchased breeding species were not included in the quest. But the deadline wasn't long. I need to draw a conclusion within 45 days. The compensation absolutely had to be more than the 400,000 points that I used. No other demon would be crazy enough to spend points like this. But I couldn't pave the way without an adventure. This was the first achievement quest, so it was well worth the investment. I need to increase the breeding rate. I acted in a more bold manner. I decided to give them natural enemies. Depending on the presence of predators, the breeding rate could increase by a maximum of 2 times. It didn't matter if the adults died since I needed their young. I placed a large number of orcs without any concern. The orcs were low-grade creatures, but there were a lot of them. All 3 species were intermediate 3 LV, but that number was enough to be a threat. In addition, I could get more information by observing their fights. Queek, queek. Dozens of orcs stuck together and snorted roughly. At first, there were hundreds, but now only this small amount was left. Dark shadows were lurking around. They came like shadows, so it wasn't easy for the orcs to prepare. Saber Tiger, queek. One orc shouted. This was the identity of the species threatening the orcs. At first, they had succeeded in hunting a few saber tigers. On that day, the orcs fed the orc hero who dealt the final blow. But the next day, 1 or 2 orcs in the surroundings started to disappear. It was only after dozens of orcs disappeared that they realized the saber tigers were making a counterattack. Since then, every day was a series of struggles. But the orcs were a lower-grade creature. The level they belonged to also wasn't high. They couldn't stop the saber tigers that worked covertly in the dark. Of course, the saber tigers received some damage, but the orcs were on the brink of being wiped out. Gruua, CCHWIK. A clear advantage? The saber tigers glided out of the darkness. Intense auras coming from every direction. The orcs trembled weakly. I observed through the crystal ball the actions of the minotaurs, saber tigers and dark bears against the orcs. The saber tigers were the only ones that showed the most overwhelming strength. The minotaurs and dark bears were shaken when the enemies emerged. There was a difference in the time they took to initiate a counterattack against the orcs. Blitz tactics. The saber tigers were the first ones to wipe out the orcs. The mobility was better than expected and the saber tigers moved with confidence. They quickly identified the capabilities of the orcs. Unfortunately, no unique body was born, but there is a difference in potential. The minotaurs, saber tigers and dark bears were all intermediate 3LV. They would have similar stats and potential. However, the newly born saber tigers had on average a 10% higher potential. At this point, I was certain of it to some degree. It is the saber tigers. I decided to breed the saber tigers in South Korea's dungeon. Long, sharp fangs, quick and knowing how to take advantage of the dark. They were a perfect fit for South Korea's mountainous terrain. I immediately tried to change the terrain. If the environment was the same and the magic power wavelength matched, then I had high expectations for the breeding. Yeehee, how many points will it cost to set up the entire 18th floor? Yeehee watched calmly from next to me. Do you want the number or height of the mountains to be different? Is it possible to create a rolling mountain range? Wide mountain ranges. This place would be optimized for the saber tigers. Yeehee stretched out her 10 fingers and started to count. Master, I've been doing the calculations. It should be around 250,000 points. Set it up. Well, it isn't that hard. But is it worth it? The number of saber tigers is too low right now. The numbers are increasing. I purchased an additional 100 saber tigers from the store. It was a bold decision. The compensation for the achievement quest was unknown, so pouring 500,000 points into it was foolish. Changing the terrain would increase the consumption to almost 800,000 points. But that was for common demons. I had a lot more points than them. Other demons didn't have this level of wealth and I could consider it an investment. I didn't know when this opportunity would come again. It was better to use the points for a chance to gain higher compensation. In addition, this was a quest. The first achievement from it would certainly follow. I don't think that any other demons have completed this achievement quest. I calculated that I wouldn't receive great damage. Yeehee's eyes popped out. Master, what are you doing? You will be in a bad mood and regret the points later. Yeehee is sure of this. Master will regret it the next day like I did when I secretly made the forest terrain. Hup. Yeehee hurriedly blocked her mouth. But I already knew what she meant to say. Yeehee was the opposite of the other fairies that liked lying. She was very clumsy and hardly ever lied. Change the terrain. Ah, I see. Yeehee. Yeehee thought she was safe and laughed awkwardly. I will change the terrain and then Yeehee will give you another honey tea. Didn't she say she wouldn't give it to me anymore after I returned from the Japanese dungeon? She forgot. Fairies often forgot trivial things. And in the first place, she was able to be a beekeeper because of the forest. Not long ago, Yeehee changed the 15th floor into a forest terrain. Well, I had checked the status through the crystal ball. I had handed over the points to her, so excessive consumption of points wasn't embezzlement. Delicious honey. Yeehee had low standards when it came to this. Yeehee didn't know this and was just laughing, yeehee, while changing the terrain. Indeed, the terrain change caused the breeding rate to noticeably increase. This could be called a synergy effect with the creatures. However, there wasn't much time. There was 30 days left. I needed to make as much offspring as possible. I could open up the Dungeon Master's magic power, but this would have side effects. The first was that the creature was more likely to die than be modified. In fact, this was confirmed through the werewolves. For now, I just needed to induce breeding as naturally as possible. I spent each day working on the dungeon's internal affairs. Then the stone that Dubalong gave me started shining. He finally got in touch. I took out the stone. A little bit of magic power was injected and a voice came out. Randolph Brigzeal Nim, do you remember me? Dubalong. I am in charge of the Demon World auction. I nodded my head. I remember. Ahu, I'm glad. I was worried that you wouldn't remember me. In fact, this is taboo in the spirit world, which is why I am only contacting you now. I know that Randolph Nim is our best auction client. Haha, did you just contact me for a greeting? Then I am a little disappointed. No, are you joking? Do you think this is the gift? You shouldn't be upset about carrying this stone. I am planning to give Randolph Nim a real gift, perhaps. Would you like to know the list of auction items in advance? It was right to the point. This was exactly what wanted. I have a little bit of interest. Haha, then feel at ease. In fact, this is a gift, but it is close to the auction. However, Randolph Nim doesn't need to worry about any damages. This will also benefit you. Indeed, Earl Randolph Briggseel Nim, your words are different from other demons. I will send you the list as soon as possible. It is hard to send a piece of paper while avoiding the radar system, but Randolph Nim is one of our VIP clients. He might be patronizing me, but it was true. In fact, access from the spirit world to this world was virtually sealed off. Passing even one sheet of paper through was a gamble. But it is necessary. I was an existence that would become a thorn to the demons. I would benefit them. That alone made the dark spirits specifically cater to me. Points was essential for them to increase their status. If I used a few more points, then I was sure that their attitude would change. But this wasn't spoken. If they let me know the auction goods, then I was more likely to purchase. After a while, a piece of paper fell from the space next to the dungeon core. It was filled with the name of 100 different auction items. You sure are reliable. Thank you. I should be thanking you. A perfect win-win situation. A secret agreement was forged in a moment's notice. I couldn't know the details from the list since it only had the name of the items. But I could figure out how to efficiently distribute my points. There are quite a few things to buy in this auction. I touched my chin while reading down the auction list. Indeed, the second year had better items than the first year. But I couldn't see any high-class creatures. It was understandable that the dark spirits would hold back those types of creatures. Of course, I couldn't be sure. I didn't know the exact number of high-class creatures that existed. Or something special like Krasla might appear in the auction. Either way, the amount I can purchase depends on the reward of the achievement quest. I stared at the dungeon through the crystal ball. Most of the female saber tigers had a bulging belly. As of today, it was the 30th day of the quest. It was a situation where 4 to 5 saber tigers would be born at a time, and I was expecting at least 100. I waited for that time to come closer. Soon, several message windows popped up in the air. Achievement quest breeding species has been completed. The saber tiger matches the dungeon's magic power wavelength by 99%. A total of 166 has been successfully bred. The compensation will be calculated based on the intermediate 3 LV creatures. The basic compensation is 1,500,000 PT, and an additional 1,717,768 PT has been paid. The basic compensation was considerable, especially when considering that I received 2 million points for being the first to kill a demon. Plus, there was the additional compensation as well, 3.2 million for one quest. I already got a lot of benefits from my investment. My points had increased to 5.7 million. I had assumed that I would only reach 4 million. But this wasn't the end. Incredible achievement. The first achievement quest has been completed. The achievement quest has given the concept of a bonus that will occur when the score is more than expected. Depending on the user's actions, it might be possible to acquire more compensation. 800,000 PT will be paid. 6.5 million. It was so outrageous that a laugh couldn't even emerge. The remaining time until the Demon World auction was 15 days. Even that time wasn't wasted. I didn't play around. I left the dungeon after a long time with Krasla and headed to Heaven's Will. The raid group Devil Hunters was on the second floor and staring breathlessly at the wall-mounted TV. Oh my god, the real world is being ruined. 30 monster waves taking place simultaneously in different places. Hyuk, Yu-Un Hai and Li Ji Hai's eyes widened. Uni, are we going to move? We are flooded with requests for help. We can't just sit here sighing. I don't know what to do. Li Ji Hai shook her head. They're hoping for Captain Nim. What help will we be? Still, the number of deceased has already passed over 5 digits. Have you forgotten almost dying when targeting the dungeon? Are you going to waste your life here? Then we can only watch? Those who have strength should act. The two women filled with concerns were having a heated discussion. Kung, Krasla struck his spear on the ground. At the same time, their eyes shone as they saw me. Captain Nim. Their faces were filled with joy. This was my first appearance since the second monster wave in South Korea. Where the hell have you been? Li Ji Hai whined. I ignored her and said, the Devil Hunters raid group will now focus on preventing the monster waves. We will start to move this evening. Yeah, as expected of Captain Nim. This is why I like Captain Nim tilde. Yu-Un Hai laughed and winked at me. She saw me as an apostle of justice. But that wasn't my real purpose. The purpose of the monster wave is to earn points. But I can't stand still. I needed to stop it as much as possible. That was the primary plan. And while moving, devil hunters could gain the spotlight. It was funny that I was humanity's strongest hope against the demons.